development system analysis approach. I extend my deepest gratitude to all the dignitaries, honorable speakers, and guests for your esteemed presence at the assemblage. We gather here to objectively address the methodological approaches in systems analysis and the role of mainstreaming technology for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Now it's time for me to invite our keynote speaker who will formally start the conference, Dr. Krishnan Srinivasa Raghavan. Dr. Krishnan Srinivasa Raghavan is currently serving as Head of Exploration Accelerator Lab, UNDP. He is working towards leveraging the potential of science, technology, and innovation for achieving sustainable development goals. His specialties lies in strategic partnerships, design thinking, innovation acceleration, international technology transfer, regional cooperation, new and emerging technologies, STI policies, and interventions. I request you to put your hands together for Dr. Krishnan Srinivasa Raghavan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. A very good afternoon to all of you. I think we are already running late, so we would like to wind up as quickly as possible, because the idea of us being here is to understand how technology can actually accelerate the achievement of sustainable development goals. And we have an eminent speaker list of speakers for this particular session, which is kind of a very interesting mix of policy as well as technology. So we are going to have some presentations focusing on the technology side, and we are going to have some presentations focusing on the policy side. And let me start sharing what we are doing at the UNDP Accelerator Lab in India. So UNDP Accelerator Lab Network is a global UNDP innovation, world's fastest and largest learning network officially, currently covering 114 countries. We are doing experiments, both policy as well as technology, and institutional level changes through policy, targeted interventions. And we call them experiments. It could be social experiments, it could be technology experiments, it could be deployment of innovations across a wide range of sectors. And the knowledge generated, whether it is a success or failure, is immediately shared with the global network, so that we get to understand what works and what doesn't work. And if it works, how to scale it up quickly. So this is a global network. And what we generate as an experience as part of the India Accelerator Lab, we quickly share across the world. And when we talk about technology in the context of Sustainable Development Goals, as most of you are aware, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and of which at least 10 Sustainable Development Goals are directly impacted with technology, right? So if we have a very innovative technology, if we have a productivity enhancing technology, it can actually directly impact 10 out of the 17 SDGs. Of course, it touches across all 17 SDGs, but the major impact is on the 10 SDGs. And when you look at the kind of targets, there are 169 targets within these SDGs. And about 70% of the targets within the SDGs, again, comes from technology. So technology as a means to achieve SDG has a huge potential to accelerate the progress, and especially we are in the decade of action. So 2020 to 2030, this 10-year period, we call it decade of action, and how technology applied at a very strategic level can push the progress towards SDGs. And what we are trying to do in India is, I can share with you one example. We are trying to build India's first blockchain platform for Indian spices. So Indian spices, we have about $4 billion export market, and we have another $1 to $2 billion domestic market. So it's a huge market. And there are a lot of structural issues related to spices sector. So we are trying to introduce blockchain as a way of enhancing the transparency and accountability of spices value chain. So that, most of you must be aware, blockchain is something like a ledger. It's an electronic ledger, and it is monitored. So each transaction across the value chain in the blockchain has to be approved by all stakeholders. So in that sense, nobody can actually tamper the data. So it brings in a lot of transparency, because nobody without the approval of the entire ecosystem, cannot change the data. So in that sense, it brings accountability. For example, farmers will get to know exactly what kind of market price the spices is actually being sold, because they may be selling their spice at a very low price. But blockchain enables them to see what is actually happening, how much my ginger or my chili is being sold in the market. So blockchain gives that transparency. And also blockchain enables smart contracts. And farmers can actually directly get into buyers in New Delhi or any other city and can actually negotiate a better price. So there are a lot of transparency and market related advantages blockchain brings. And so when you look at from a SDG lens, Sustainable Development Goal lens, you can see enhanced income of farmers, so which is actually contributing to eradication of poverty and decent work for all. So all these SDGs are interrelated. So when you look at a technology, we cannot look at it in isolation. One technology may have impact on several SDGs. So the project that I'm leading here is on the blockchain, how it is actually transforming the spices sector in terms of efficiency of the value chain, in terms of how much farmers can benefit, in terms of how much transparency we can bring into the value chain and how we can transform it. The another aspect for this is like we are also looking at the quality of spices, right? In many times what happens is the export is done and it reaches the foreign market, but it gets rejected because it could be having a pesticide contamination, or it could be having aflatoxins or some other contamination, which the European consumers or any other international markets may reject it based on the quality parameters. What we are trying to do is even to see the traceability of spices from the farm, what are the stages of processing and who assures the quality of spices. So including the certification laboratories, we are bringing everybody into the blockchain system. And we are jointly doing it with Spices Board of India. So they are our partners for this project. So this is just a practical example of what UNDP is trying to do, how we are bringing transparency and accountability through a technology like blockchain, and how it can accelerate progress across sustainable development goals. So with this, I just wanted to kind of save time. I want to invite the first speaker, Dr. Preeti Soni, who is head of the Asian and Pacific Center for Transfer of Technology of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. The topic she will be speaking is technology innovations for achieving the SDGs in Asia Pacific, challenges and opportunities for and regional cooperation. So here we have a very interesting mix of speakers. So the first presentation will talk about the regional cooperation on technology for SDGs. And then we will also look at policies by other speakers. So we will have a mix of speakers, technology, policy, system. At the end, we will have some time for question and answers, after the presentations are over. If that is okay with you, we could proceed. I would like to invite Dr. Preeti Soni to join us and share her experience and regional perspectives on technology for accelerating the progress in achieving SDGs. Over to you, Dr. Preeti.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Krishnan. Can you hear me?
इसमें प्रीति चाहिए.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Dr. Preeti, your audio is not coming here.
Ma'am, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear her.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes.
I mean, we can hear her online.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Preeti, now we can hear. If you could, increase the speaker volume.
Okay. I'll bring the mic closer to me. I hope I'm audible.
Now perfect. Thank you, Preeti.
Thank you, Krishnan, and good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here and speak to you on this occasion. And I would like to thank the organizers, TIFAC-IIASA for giving us the opportunity to present our thoughts at this August gathering. We'd like to speak on technology innovations for achieving SDGs in the Asia-Pacific region. I'm also joined with my colleague, Dr. Sahu, who is also online, but I will be making the presentation on behalf of APCTT. Next, please. Next. Can you please move the slide to the next sheet? Yeah. So what I plan to do today is give you a broad overview of the topic, that is technology innovation in Asia Pacific. That is because this is the first presentation, and we also believe that a number of specific things would be touched upon in the subsequent presentation. So I'll just like to talk about the SDGs progress in the Asia Pacific region, innovations for sustainable development, how enabling innovation ecosystems can be developed to achieve SDGs, regional technology cooperation and collaboration, and the role it plays. So with this overview, I will also like to take the opportunity to talk a little about APCTT, that's the Asian and Pacific Center for Transfer of Technology. And APCTT provides a regional technology cooperation platform and is very relevant for the topic today because we work to look at technology innovation in the Asia-Pacific region. So with this, this is the overall structure. I'd like to begin my presentation. Next slide, please. So technology, as you know, is evolving. In fact, the first industrial revolution used steam power to mechanize production. The second used electric power to create mass production. The third industrial revolution uses electronics, computers, information technologies to automate production. And what we are witnessing now is the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution that builds on the third revolution, or the digital revolution, and is characterized by technologies that bring together digital, physical, and biological spheres for betterment and advancement for development across regions. Some of these technologies include artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, 3D printing, robotics, nanotechnologies, among others. Technologies and innovations are actually transforming our lives and the way we work, where we live, relate to each other, and even how we entertain ourselves. So they play a big role in our lives. Next, please. While looking at the SDGs in the Asia-Pacific region, we all know that Asia-Pacific region hosts some of the very fast developing economies of the world. However, the progress related to the SDGs and its achievement has been very slow. In the last SDG report for Asia and the Pacific 2022, which is published every year by SCAP, indicates slow progress in SDGs for the region. It indicates that there has been some progress on industry, innovation, and infrastructure goal, that's goal 9, and on energy goal related to affordable and clean energy, which is goal 7. The goal 12 on consumption and production, and on climate action, that is goal 13, there has been a regression. And some of the other goals like goal 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, and 14 have shown very slow progress throughout the Asia-Pacific region. The report also points out that the Sustainable Development Goals have been slowed down. The achievement towards them have been slowed down due to COVID-19 pandemic and climate change that have exacerbated the development challenges and slowed the achievements of SDGs. In fact, it actually mentions that at the current pace, the region will not be able to achieve any of these 17 goals as envisaged. It will only be able to achieve the SDGs as it stands today in business as usual scenario by the year 2065. So that means that there is a very urgent need to accelerate our progress towards sustainable development and do a lot more. And in this, to accelerate that growth, innovation and innovative technologies can play a critical and catalyzing role. According to a study done by the World Economic Forum, 70% of the 169 targets under the Sustainable Development Goals can be enabled by the existing 4IR technologies and their applications. So their need is to accelerate the pace of innovation and technological development and move towards much faster towards sustainable development. Next, please. With increased diffusion and adoption of technologies, countries are realizing the range of opportunities that define, how we move towards SDGs. However, a lot more needs to be done. But the examples and the potential have been well documented. For example, especially under digital transformation, innovation in production processes and integrated manufacturing are bringing enhanced efficiency in the overall manufacturing and production systems. Applications for leading to more efficient and continued delivery of public services, including cash transfer, have become important. E-government services based on digital platforms are becoming increasingly more and more popular, and this has actually been shown by COVID in the last 2 years. There has been a lot of use of digital technology for healthcare, for education sectors, and also for digital payments to the marginalized. In India, the examples are many, and they include the CoWIN platform for vaccine monitoring and also Aadhaar for citizen mobilization and a unique identification system. So all these are good examples in terms of how social impact can be reached through use of efficient and digital technologies. In other sectors, for conservation of resources, for environment protection, artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things, enabling precision agriculture through inputs and water use optimization, reducing agricultural impact on water use by 2 to 5%. And that's sufficient. That is significant. If you look at how technology is looking at safety challenges in factories and industrial sites, digital twin technologies, open source ecosystems are being applied for intelligent unmanned aerial and ground vehicles. There are many such examples, like utilization of drone-based solutions for improved yield on agriculture, smart sensors to improve efficiency of post-combustion carbon capture, Internet of Things for efficient conversion of waste into clean energy, and use of big data for early prediction of extreme weather events. So overall, the benefits of technologies for sustainable development are significant. And to harness this, we will need a lot more than just the technology know-how. We would have to look at human resource development, focus more on technology-based entrepreneurship, startups, improving skill development in various countries, bring in effective finance for technologies through ODA, crowdfunding, and other sources, and also build upon global technology and partnerships, including SDI. Some of the tools are SDI for SDG roadmaps, and these can really be used to develop technologies in the way that we want. Next, please. In terms of, and here innovation is a key, and I would like to reiterate that inclusive innovation, which builds on local solutions and specifically on green technologies, are very relevant in the current scenario. The considerations to look at innovation would include how you can improve the application. So wider application would be important. The affordability, accessibility, localization of technology, market readiness are all important considerations leading towards the success of innovations. One another aspect that I've already talked about is the use of emerging technologies within innovation systems would be very important. Next, please. And why I say that is because 4IR technologies are becoming more and more relevant today. Next slide, please. If you look at the market size, it has been increasing significantly, and this trend would continue till for over the next few years. And there is a unprecedented increase in the market share of these technologies. And this is shown by this graph here. I'm not going into it, but the idea is to explain to you that we would have to adopt emerging technologies and make our ecosystems attuned to adopting them. All these technologies have the potential, but they also come with their own set of challenges. With 4IR technologies and some of the other technologies, there are associated challenges like digital divide across different regions, different sections of society, issues related to data capture, use, potential impact on employment, so social impact is important. And their uptake is also differentiated because of the spending, digital infrastructure, and the gaps in policy and regulatory systems. Next, please. To effectively harness technologies and innovations for sustainable development, therefore, it will be important to have effective and balanced innovation systems. Overall, it is observed that despite human and economic impact of COVID-19, governments and enterprises in many parts of the world, including in Asia Pacific, have increased investment in innovation. Some of the developing countries are in fact performing above expectation on innovation relative to their level of economic development. And these including countries like India, Vietnam, among others. The Global Innovation Index, and that's the table that has been shown here, it also shows that many sectors, many countries have done well. And in fact, many sectors have shown remarkable resilience, especially that the sectors that have embraced digitalization, efficient technologies, and innovation. This indicates that innovations and new ideas are critical for overcoming pandemic and ensuring post-pandemic economic recovery and sustainable development. What is important in this regard is innovation ecosystems. Efficiency in translating innovation inputs into outputs is the key. Some of the Asia-Pacific economies excel in efficiently converting innovation inputs into outputs. And these are some of the blue and highlighted countries over here, including Korea, China, India, Vietnam, Philippines, Iran. These have shown that higher innovative outputs are achievable against lower innovation inputs. This is especially relevant for countries which are resource deficient. With little investment, they have been able to actually bring out a large output. And that has been done because of their stronger emphasis on creating and strengthening the national innovation systems with efficient processes that are necessary to convert lower innovation inputs into higher innovation outputs. So the systems and processes are important, and this could be the strategy for countries in the Asia-Pacific region, especially the least developing countries with resource constraint. Next, please. And for creating these innovation systems, we have to make the transition from the traditional innovation ecosystems to the more renewed ones under the new paradigm of changing scenarios. We are faced with challenges related to climate change, COVID, and now we are trying to achieve SDGs. So the paradigm is very different from what it was about 15 years ago. For this, the countries would have to analyze, and the stakeholders would have to analyze the SDI frameworks and the conditions under which they operate. Having said that, they will have to reset the national priorities and goals, looking at the current scenarios as well as the SDG achievement goals. In view of this, they have to redesign and revise policies and strategies, ensuring inclusiveness of technologies, wider stakeholder participation for innovations, and promote a collaborative innovation and technology transfer environment. They have to adopt emerging technologies and 4IR technologies and be very conscious of the challenges that are associated with it so that they can address them better. And lastly, they also have to incentivize technology-based entrepreneurships and startups. Next, please. So in the COVID-19 pandemic aftermath, it is very important that the innovation systems are mission-oriented. We work towards a common goal or a global goal, and put all our energies, resources, and our stakeholders come together in actually achieving that and directing innovation towards that goal. This was seen during COVID. Everybody came together to create new vaccines to address the COVID pandemic, and the vaccines were developed in a never heard of time frame, and this was very important. Similar kind of things are needed for maybe climate change, for resilience development, and other areas as well. There has to be a stronger interface between science, policy, and society. They have to work together. Science cannot be delinked from policy. Both have to go hand in hand. There has to be a more responsible research and innovation environment where we also look at economy, people, planet in an integrated manner. A lot more focus on transdisciplinary research. We bring together different areas of research and disciplines for betterment of the global good, and more reliance on open science and open data platforms. Next, please.
Dr. Preeti, we will have another 5 minutes. So if you could kindly, yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'll quickly talk to you about a little bit of some of the strategies that we have identified based on the work that we have done. We need to identify technology gaps and opportunities for collaboration, specifically if we are looking at regional cooperation, because regional cooperation would be the key. We have to identify common problems, collaborate in R&D strategies, set up centers for with common facilities, maybe have co-funded projects, movement of human resources, establish more collaborative platform between private sector, different stakeholders, and a strong environment for capacities building of researchers, stakeholders, with better data integration, and thereby facilitate cross-border sharing of resources. These are some of the strategies, and I don't want to go into too much detail as the time is short, but this is very important for building a new paradigm. And this is where the last one, facilitating, sharing of resources and strategies and building strategies for regional cooperation, that APCTT becomes very relevant. Next, please. Krishnan, I'll just very quickly walk you through APCTT and what it stands for.
Sure.
We are a center established in 1977, and we cater to all the 53 member states and associate members of ESCAP, and we provide a regional technology cooperation platform. Next, please. We are hosted in New Delhi, and the mandate is to strengthen capacities of member states to develop and manage national innovation systems, develop, adopt, and transfer technologies, improve terms of transfer, and build capacities around that, and identify development and transfer of technologies relevant to the region. In this regard, we strengthen regional technology cooperation and transfer, and also support achievement of SDGs. Although we look at all SDGs, some of them are focused a little bit more, including 3, 7, 9, 13, and 17. Next, please. Our strategic focus is to look at enhancing technology innovation for sustainable development, improve mechanism for technologies transfer, IPM and other such tools, and facilitate regional cooperation with a focus on climate change, on building back better from the pandemic, and promoting emerging and 4I technologies. Next, please. Some of the modalities used are policy and analytical support, thematic policy support that we do. We really focus on capacity building and technical assistance, regional technology cooperation through databases, networks, technology, facilitation consultations. During COVID, we did facilitate countries coming together to talk about innovations and low-cost technologies to fight COVID. And we also look at information and knowledge sharing between countries through our periodicals, guidebooks, and databases. Next, please. So this is what I think APCTD has a very important role to play in regional cooperation. And we would like to invite as many stakeholders to come together with us and join hands as we look towards technology innovations for sustainable development goals. In conclusion, I'd just like to highlight that technology innovations are critical for achievement of the SDGs. Progress towards achievement of SDGs can be accelerated to further strengthening of innovation systems. They will also be important, that is, strengthening of innovation systems to overcome the impacts of COVID-19 and helping to build back better, which is actually needed for technology development and also for moving towards sustainable development. For better success of innovations, inclusiveness, affordability, accessibility, market readiness, and localization of innovations are very important considerations. We have to establish efficient and balanced innovation systems. In fact, countries have to strive for higher innovation outputs against lower innovation outputs. This is very relevant for Asia Pacific in particular, but also across countries across the globe. This can make innovation systems, this can be done through innovation systems and processes made more efficient and bring in efficacy and robustness in the innovation systems. We need to accelerate socio-economic transformation through development, transfer, and diffusion of emerging technologies, especially for AI technologies, which are very relevant for the region. Invest in human resource development and collaboration, strengthen international and regional cooperation, including generating resources, and in effect, bringing all of us together. We are working towards a global growth to achievement of SDGs, so we cannot afford to leave anyone behind. We have to take everybody together and inculcate a spirit of collaboration as we look at technology innovation for SDG achievement. Next, please. Thank you very much. And I hand it over to Krishnan now.
Thank you. Thank you, Preeti. I think that's a very comprehensive presentation and a brilliant presentation highlighting the importance of, not only technology, but to create an innovation ecosystem that can actually strengthen the technology capacity of countries to use technology to achieve sustainable development goals. And also you talked about, human resource development, which is very, very important in terms of when we look at technology. It is not just the technology per se, but we are looking at human resource capacity building, building technology entrepreneurship, technology financing. So you touched upon all the core areas which are required to invest in technologies which can reap benefits in terms of sustainable development goals. So in the interest of time, we will move to the next speaker, Mr. Jayadeva Hiranya, I think who's physically here, to make a presentation on a critical review of agricultural credit policies in India and their impact on sustainability. Since we started the session a bit late, I would like to request you to finish in 10 minutes so that if there are any questions, you could answer.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
A very warm good evening to all the dignitaries present here and virtually. At the juncture of 75th Independence Day celebration, I am delighted to present my topic of discussion, a critical review of the agriculture credit policies in India and their impact on sustainability. I am Jaydev Hirane, pursuing research in Manipal Institute of Management under the guidance of Dr. Harish G. Joshi. These are the topics covered under this discussion: approach of agricultural credit policies in India, agricultural credit and sustainability, impact of agricultural credit policies in India and analysis, future reflections on the policy interventions. As agriculture sector is the backbone of Indian economy, there was and is an increasing demand for agriculture credit in India for the smooth functioning of agriculture activities. Hence, since independence, the main driving force of the agricultural credit is the direct credit to farmers, wherein the farmers will use short-term, medium-term, and long-term for the production purposes. Whereas lately, indirect credit has been increasing, where institutions and agencies use it for infrastructure development purposes. Rural area employs around 60% of the workforce. As a result, the activities will have a substantial impact on the rural development process in India. As a result, not only it is important to sustain agricultural activities, but also to identify strategies to improve the performance. So in order to understand the future reflections of credit policies, it is very necessary to review and analyze the effectiveness of the previous policy performance. So since independence, there are three major approaches that Indian government has developed to sustain agricultural activities and to improve the agricultural performance. First one is multi-agency approach, where farmers have always had the options of obtaining financing from any of the lending institutions. Working committee has reviewed four major aspects under this multi-agency approach. One is area demarcation between agencies, where it tried to prevent wasteful competition among the lending agencies. Second one is the consortium arrangement, where it is expected that both commercial banks and cooperative banks jointly meet the credit requirements. Third one is no due certificate. Fourth one is introduction of the agriculture passbook, that is introduced in 1965. Due to this approach, the activities of moneylenders and their exploitation has been reduced in recent years. Second approach is service area approach, where each bank has to adopt villages and they are required to meet the credit. This approach was introduced with the goal of promoting the orderly and planned development of the country's rural and semi-urban areas. Third one is comprehensive credit policy, which recently in the 2004 they have introduced with the purpose of raising institutional credit to agriculture by 30% per year. Banks were also ordered to ensure that each branch finances at least 100 farmers. This policy also includes a wide range of debt relief measures such as debt restructuring, one-time settlement, and loans to repay money lender borrowings. These are the major credit policy interventions since independence. Since the RBI Act in 1935, there were several credit policy interventions that have been implemented by the government to enhance the credit facilities. The evolving patterns of agriculture policies are mentioned as in the chart. Starting from nationalization of the banks, which also led to introduction of the lead banks in 1969. In 1975, on the recommendation of the Narsimhan Working Committee, RRBs are established, where it has recommended to lend 75% of the credit to the priority sector. This was the major policy intervention that government had planned. To regulate governance for the feasibility of credit lending process to the agriculture sector, NABARD has been established. Since then, it has been a backbone of the progress of the agriculture sector. In 1998, KCC scheme has been introduced, majorly to meet short-term credit requirements for the farming community. To meet the increasing demand for the credit, the plan for doubling of agriculture credit has been laid out. In 2006 and 7, an interest subvention plan was implemented on the short-term credit granted to farmers. In the 2011-12 budget, an additional 3% subvention was promised to farmers who repay their loan on time. On the suggestion of W.C. Chakrabarty's working committee, the cabinet approved recapitalization of the RRBs in 2011 because they were not meeting the credit requirements and had not been profitable for over 2 decades. The procedure of RRB amalgamation completed the process. The one state, one RRB was initiated in the year 2018. In the year 2020, National Agriculture Infrastructure Financing Facility was set up. The agriculture community is unaware that one of the objectives of this project was also fund community farming. Most of the people thought that it's only to fund infrastructure, but it's one of the objectives of this policy was also to fund community farming. These are the policy implications of particularly of agriculture policy. On the basis of agriculture policy, credit policy, bank will finance agriculture credit. It will create the value, and the farmers will be the beneficiaries of the agriculture credit policies. And after availing credit, they will go to the resources where they will infrastructure and purchasing equipment, etc. for the production purposes. And based on the capabilities, they will repay the loan. But other government interventions like minimum support price and credit control, where they mitigate the problem of credit and demand and supply problems, it will indirectly affect credit policies that farmers will think that when we should buy the credit. If MSE is high, the farmers will avail more credit. These are the direct effects of agriculture credit policies to sustainable development goals. But few factors we have to be considered. In the recent report of Sustainability Development Goals, they have mentioned that more than 4 years of progress against poverty has been erased due to COVID-19. Above 1 in 10 people worldwide are suffering from hunger. Global economic recovery is hampered by COVID-19, high inflation, policy uncertainties, labor market changes. Unsustainable patterns of consumption and production are the root cause of the climate change, biodiversity loss, and the pollution. These are few of the data which have regarding agriculture credit policies. Since 2 decades, the agriculture credit lending in the ground level has been increasing. But what is the output of that? If you see the agriculture sector at a glance, the gross value added and gross capital formation is not sustainable or is not in constant mode, even though total exports of agriculture has been increasing in the recent years. This is the regarding policies and the relations with the agriculture credit lending. Here since 1969, we can see that up to 1998, until the KCC has been implemented, the agriculture credit flow is in declining mode. After the introduction of KCC, the agriculture credit flow has been increased. This is the main factors which maybe it is politically motivated or some other factors. But loan waiver, if you see the stat, the loan waiver has been affected badly to lending agriculture credit processes. In the recent All India Debt and Investment Survey, it has been reported that 35% of the rural India are in the in debt, whereas 40.3% are cultivators. Even if you see the growth rate of agriculture credit, it has been in declining mode. Only during the pandemic mode, the agriculture sector has been revived. Other all years, it has been in the declining mode. These are the few observations of the data analysis. Agriculture credit disbursement have been increased significantly after the implementation of the Kisan Credit Card Scheme. As per All India Debt and Investment Report 2019, in rural India, 66% of the credit disbursement have been carried through institutional lending, which is also a positive sign. Still, a lot has to be done in order to mitigate the problem of exploitation of non-institutional lending. Constraints faced by RRBs hinder the growth of credit expansion, whereas to reduce the number of RRBs, it took 30 years. The Agri Debt Waiver Scheme discouraged banks from extending further credit to farmers, given the fact that recent statistics show that NPA in agriculture sectors are increasing, which is also a concerning trend. The analysis of the impact of credit policies that has been conducted reveal that economic growth in agriculture and allied sector is decreasing and inconsistent. It is also a notable fact that there is an absence of holistic evaluation system to assess the impact of credit disbursement. So what are the future reflections of the policy interventions? Moving forward, the major questions we must answer is, how is it possible and is it possible? I would like to mention few important aspects which will help in understanding government approaches in policy interventions. First one is doubling farmers' income in 2022. The transformation from the concept of doubling agriculture credit to doubling agriculture farmers' income is itself a positive development in the aspect of government interventions. Even if the target appeared to be unattainable in 2022, COVID and war situations were an additional obstacle to accomplishing it. The major underlying problem that farmers are facing is the disparity in the income comparing to the other sectors. Niti Aayog provides 4 solutions to prevent this problem: improving the production, resource use efficiency or resource valuation, increasing the cropping intensity, and diversification of high-yield crops. Second one is impact of agriculture in rural development. Rural areas have more resources than agriculture use than urban areas. As because 65% of the Indians still rely on agriculture activities, the growth of rural areas will be based on agriculture operations. Following such operations continuously with the backing of government interventions and decision-making process and technological improvement will add in the sustainability of agriculture activities and the doubling of farmers' income as well. When discussing system analysis, the attention should not be only on the specific policies from a certain sector, but on the procedure as a whole. In this regard, the sole purpose of the analysis in the agriculture credit policies should be the process of researching a procedure of credit lending schemes to determine its goals and objectives and creating systems and procedures that will effectively achieve them.
5 minutes more.
Yes, finals. These are several areas where we can strengthen more and scale up agriculture activities in the future to meet the goal of doubling farmers' income by the year 2030. Gaps have been identified under 3 major categories, which will aid in future policy implications. First one is there is a need for systematic evaluation method. To measure the sustainability development objectives, 5 major indicators have been developed by the researchers. Relevancy with the relation to target, feasibility with the relations with the official data and estimation, measurability with the in terms of statistical measurement, accessibility in terms of easy communication and easy understanding, transparency in terms of consulting with stakeholders and providing all details in the public domain. Furthermore, one of the major indicators that is accountability, that will be held accountable for policy implementation and execution, which will be crucial for accomplishing policy objectives. Absence of accountability made RRB striving for 3 decades. Hence, as mentioned in the RBI documents of Review of Agriculture Credit Policies 2019, holistic evaluation method is the need of the hour. Second one is technology-based solutions. In the 21st century, without depending technological help, achieving the goal of the policy seems impossible. In relation with credit lending, I would like to mention 2 factors where technological advancement will aid in effective utilization of the credit policies by the beneficiaries. First one is providing farmers with customized climatic information services that will assist them in understanding system requirement for their production. Second thing is technology to enable faster and feasible credit facility and also to address grievances faced by the farming community. Third and final one is collaboration with various agencies and state governments. Consultation with the various stakeholders for the policy during various stages of policy implementation are the only way for the better outcome. Furthermore, industry-government collaboration will aid in the subsidization of the technical products to the farmers. Academia-government collaboration should also be encountered as academic research will aid in gaining key insights in the policy interventions. This conference is also one of the prime examples of academia and government collaborations. All these strategies will directly or indirectly help farming community to utilize the credit requirements effectively and avoid wastage of resources and hence help in sustainability of the agriculture sector. To conclude, as Sanskrit proverb says, Krishito nasti durbhiksham, which means that without agriculture, famine will exist. To conclude, several things must be done to enhance the agriculture sector. In this process, we must not overlook other policy actions and services that will have an indirect impact on agriculture credit flow and its utilization. Given the growing need for agriculture credit for sustainable agriculture output, it is crucial to constantly review, analyze, and evaluate the overall effectiveness of credit policies in order to achieve the intended objectives. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to the organized committee for giving me the wonderful opportunity to present my topic in front of renowned dignitaries. I am humbled and it's honor for me to present this topic. Thank you. Thank you one and all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jayadev. I think this is very, very interesting presentation. In fact, you touched upon the role of banks and the loan waivers are being a major impact in terms of sustainability, and also how COVID has pushed actually the progress made in achieving SDGs for 4 years. I think 4 years we went backwards because of the impact COVID caused in terms of agricultural value chains, which we also felt when we are implementing some agriculture projects. So I think what we need is, as you rightly mentioned, the evaluation system. I think it should be institutionalized. And effectiveness of loans and waivers and all this should be periodically checked, and the process has to be institutionalized. I think your research will feed into, in future, some processes that can actually have a check and balance on the system. Thank you very much for that. So in the interest of time, we will move to the next speaker from the Indian Space Research Organization, Dr. Girish Pujara, who will be speaking about Earth observation technology for sustainable development goals. Over to Dr. Girish.
Just a short message. I would request the speakers to keep the sessions as crisp as possible so that we can conclude prior to the panel discussion. So you can. In case you need a.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, on my side and NRS side, I thank TIFAC and IIASA for giving us such a nice podium to exchange our ideas. Of course, TIFAC has been relentless in pursuing the database development with NRSC. TIFAC has actually funded an initiative on bioenergy. Is it not audible? So TIFAC has actually funded an initiative at NRSC to develop an assessment of bioenergy related aspects using geospatial data. So it's been going on with NRSC, and I'm going to touch some points on that also. Essentially, this topic was chosen to see how Earth observation data is going to give us an edge in developing precise indicator for SDGs, because SDGs has been a very massive umbrella concept, and in that, how Earth observation data sets, which may be sometimes very, very precise to totally fuzzy, they can contribute to this thing. So I kept the terms perspectives and challenges, especially in Indian context, because there's a lot of literature on talking about this, and as you may be aware that ESA, European Space Agency, has a specific website on EO for SDGs, which is a very comprehensive approach to these aspects. So in that background, the structure of the presentation is about just to see how actually these SDGs are becoming more and more relevant, and why they are such flagship goals. Then Earth observation, what's the total spectrum of Earth observation technology available today internationally and within Indian context? And what are experiences at NRSC plus other institutes to use EO data as input for SDGs? Then how to parameterize and what data sets will evolve from there, and what methods and tools exist with that. And evolving tools actually give an edge how we put EO data into the context of SDGs. So these points I just wanted to prod on. With that back, when we call SDGs, I just recall a statement of Rakesh Sharma ji, the only astronaut from India. He said, when people go to space, they somehow get an intuition that this is the only home we are left with. So to make sustainable development as centrality to development, centrality to the whole approach of making humanity more grown is pretty relevant. So SDGs become all the more strong and relevant. And they are globally agreed indicators, because as we all know, last 3 or 4 decades of research, there are many indicators for ecosystems, economy, etc. But they're all converging into a globally set of agreed indicator set. Then they're pretty diverse. So they cover mostly every area of what we call as the development. Then it's possible now to link them with what sensors and observations give us. Inventories provide, sensors provide a lot of numbers, the potential to link them. Then we have a lot of grassroots successes in India. How to globalize such country-wise cases of successes into a globalized context, which becomes a methodology, and we can upscale them for a better development. On the right side, of course, you have this wedding cake, they call it 4+8+3, 4 configuration of SDGs, which actually build upon the concept of environment, socio-economy, then society and economy. And finally, the 17th one, which is the total partnership for the goals. So that's how we can conceive them whenever we use a kind of sensor like an Earth observation platform-based sensor. So depending on using that kind of orientation, the EO data have been put into 3 major goals. One is the demonstration of novelty of EO sensors and their practical contributions to SDG development, SDG indicator catering. Then when you develop that, instill those skills and capacity in everybody to use EO data for arriving at SDG assessment. Then improve the awareness of SDG itself, as well as how EO data can flow into it. Because as I know in my own institution, our awareness about SDGs has been building gradually. Sometimes it comes as a kind of incidental, but to bring them as a part of the design is still yet to catch up. So that becomes an important point here, because we use everybody post Google Earth, we are all EO data users. Even you want or don't want, you use the EO data and somehow connect to it intuitively. So there's a need to link them. And when you talk of all this data generation, the orientation of national statistical organizations to generate that kind of tons of data, what you need for assessing SDGs, there are some estimates telling how actually costly is for us to populate that entire cache. One estimate tells we need 254 billion between 16 to 30 period to populate all the SDG indicator. That is Zerven 2014. Contrastingly, another author, he tells that 4.5 billion is enough. So there is a lot of variability. But when you bring the EO data fraction into that domain, there are interesting studies. They say in US, the proportion is 787 to $114 million, whereas 114 is enough for bringing data from EO sources. 787 is from the conventional sources. But another interesting study, Watmore 2019, they said in Kenya, they took 330 households, and for them, it was okay to spend up to $5,000 per year per 100 square kilometer, and to get 62% of the indicator information that would otherwise come by a conventional inventory, which would cost that number, $106,500 per year. So while you go for conventional approach, this is the cost. When you bring EO data, 60% of the cost is actually coming with a lesser investment. When you talk of data collection, there are challenges. There are traditional data sources and there are EO data sources. These two are the EO data sources, and these other sets are conventional data sources. You have census data, household surveys, agriculture surveys, administrative data, civil registration, and economic statistics flowing into your databases. Whereas from here, we can produce environmental data and the geospatial data. Geospatial data means both as a satellite observation or an inventory, which is actually oriented to this EO data. So while traditional sources, there are many limitations, though whatever we are talking SDGs is mostly based on such traditional sources, but there are limitations such as you cannot access it. Availability itself is a question, quality and their continuity, then whether they are transparent data sets or not, and how to put so much of money in doing that inventory. Then once you have the data, to adapt them to SDGs, to process it, and the tools that are available for processing, they are also doubtful. In non-traditional sources, we have issues such as you may get a pixel-based data, but it may not go compatible with the the earlier statistical indicator. So statistical compatibility comes into question. Then at times satellite images may be cloud covered, and many a time the National Statistical Organization, they might be having their own resistance to adopt your data and bring into the transformation. So these are the challenges when you go for SDG assessment using a kind of spectrum what you're looking at, traditional spectrum and EO spectrum. In Indian context, as you can see here, India has progressed very well from an earliest era of 90s till today through many resolutions. So we have sensors which actually look into land and water situation, means just map the entire data in a coarse resolution. Then you have cartographic applications, that means you make a resource map with precision mapping. Then you have ocean and atmospheric sensors, which will actually give you the data on non-land areas or atmospheric areas. So these kind of sensors, they actually come with an advantage of precision geometry sitting. Means once you map it, every year, every next day you map it over one or the other. So you build a holism, you build a stack. Then because you have different spatial and temporal resolution, you can actually see things across scale. Either you zoom it or zoom out, you still have a lot of information. Then we have all weather capability also. You have microwave sensors which you can see through the cloud or the night. So that kind of capacity exists. And now, since ISRO is going through a next stage of policy formulation, bringing more startup-based imaging, launching, etc., we are going to have a different ecosystem of data stream hereafter. Just as an example, if you take a high-resolution image, which is a natural color composite, it's not the way we use the data. We use false color composites, which are red in color. Here, if you see, clearly by such a high-resolution image, you can look into two boxes here. One is a dam, check dam, or a kind of minor irrigation dam is being constructed, which actually corresponds to target 6.5, which actually tells that water resources should be used more judiciously. For that, this particular patch of information can directly go. And the lower box, it caters to 15-point-second target, which actually tells do more planting outside so that you are not going to cut the forest. So 15.2.1. So such kind of instances can be derived from an Earth-based Earth observation data, and it can feed into entire exercise of assessment. This is the set of upcoming future sensors, which are actually going beyond 1 meter. If you see the spectrum of data here on the left side, you see here, HR stands for high resolution constellation, means you have multiple satellites which can give you almost every day or every third day data. Then you have resource sat 3A, 3S, means the color data at very, very high resolution. Then resat, the micro imaging, which can see through cloud and as well as during night. Then NISAR, this is a collaborative sensor with NASA, which actually looks into the biomass of the Earth. Then OceanSat advances in ocean imaging. Then GSAT means you put a geostationary satellite. From there, you see at high resolution, 40 meter, 20 meter like that. So you can always watch India continuously every second hour, and there are a lot of data. So these are the type of resolutions which we can see in this context. These details are kept for anybody to study later. Otherwise also, India has achieved a stage wherein all weather capability, high resolution, multispectral imaging is possible, which can help us to derive various data layers from these imaging system. Then when we come to the geospatial application per se itself, what NRSC has been doing all these years to develop different data layers, which actually now they go into a online web-based system called Bhuvan, which Arul presented in the morning. Here I'm trying to just put those things into another classification of how it matches that wedding cake, environmental sector, then socio-economic sector. So terrestrial, ocean, atmospheric, different applications have been developed. Then disaster has been a very special focus of NRSC. Now we have programs being catered to, such as rural development and watershed management as well. So these are the different contexts wherein different data layers are actually executed and developed for the sake of different user ministries. This is another example wherein all urban systems are mapped and the data support is given to the planners itself. On the right side, you can see a water bodies information system wherein every pass you get, we get quantity and certain level of water quality data on Bhuvan, which you can see if you put WBIS Bhuvan, you can actually see a nice set of everyday maps about water quality and water quantity. Then another one is we supported Jal Shakti Abhiyan, which has a very strong SDG inclination, wherein multi-layers data coming from Manrega mapping, watershed mapping, as well as our conventional data sources were all put together to support the Jal Shakti Abhiyan in the last season's post-monsoon scenario, wherein a lot of water conservation structures were taken up by government. So a typical geospatial data support has been provided. Just going towards another important accomplishment, what NRSC did was to go and support Department of Land Resources to monitor 6,600 watershed projects across India, wherein we developed a system wherein every year we imaged every project at 2.5 meter color resolution, developed a smartphone application, inventoried all the activities done on the ground through the state functionaries, build a total database which actually brought in a lot of transparency. Which activity has been taken up where, whether it can be seen on the satellite data, if watershed project has experienced any land cover changes, whether the plantations have grown, water bodies have increased, forest has stopped from degrading, all such parameters were established, and all this is available for the public. So this is one of the biggest exercise probably in the recent times, wherein both the remote sensing as well as GIS data has been used to build a system to support the user ministry. Another one is we also took up support for Manrega, which is called Geo Manrega now. One month back, Minister of Singh Saab inaugurated that portal called Yuktadhara, which is used for planning the Manrega. In Manrega, we have a huge data bank, and we try to apply whether any of the SDGs are conforming to it. So we got a kind of overall picture wherein these were the main SDGs that got connected to this entire set of Manrega data. We have 5+ crore geolocations of all the activities done under Manrega. It's a pretty huge database. So some parties getting catered to most of the ministry activities, and now they are going to take up the planning of future Manrega activities as well using this portal. So this is how a orientation towards SDG using geospatial datasets has been integrated at NRSC exercises. If we just take an example, like what the Geo Committee told, that these are the targets and these are the indicators which are amenable to EO observation. I just try to give some weightage to it. So if you see here, there are some top 5 levels, 17, 11, 14, 15, and 6, which have a lot of targets and a lot of indicators as well connected to EO data. And if you just orient remote sensing and GIS as 2 data streams, this is how the picture emerges. The red fonted ones are the cases wherein RS data use is high. The blue fonted are the cases wherein GIS data population is high. So this is how the EOs have a strong connectivity to SDG. There are very nice publication recently done, which told that 15 indicators are clearly connectable to Earth observation data very precisely, means there will be no ambiguity. 40 indicators, they will connect partially, and 25 indicators, they will connect weakly. So out of 232, this is a number which actually connects to EO data. So there is a lot of potential for using EO to coming towards SDG indicator assessment. So this lower table actually tells what we have done and how it connects to different indicators. I'm not going to get into detail of it, can always go through it. So these are the layers are actually available on the Bhuvan, and they actually serve a lot of purpose to assess SDGs hereafter. So coming to the one last comparison, you have an approach called MUL, method usability level, when you use EO for SDG. Whatever the watershed monitoring exercise we did, I just try to compare them loosely, not in any precision, that whatever the process we followed for developing a parameter, which actually gets parallel to the MUL level. Means you conceive the innovation, then you proof of method concept you develop, then you verify the method, test it on the field, then approve the method, deploy and use it, and widespread sustainable utilization, of course, comes as a natural corollary. So while we developed an app we made a WebGIS system and we developed the tool, tested them with the state functionaries and sensitized them for that use. It actually became operationally used. Looking at Srishti, with that app is called Srishti and interface is called Drishti. Looking at the success of Srishti and Drishti, actually Department of Rural Development took GeoManrega next. Means they came, they saw this and they said this is very, very useful for us. So they went for geotagging of all the Manrega data sets. So that's how this kind of upscaling happens when you try to orient EO for a particular socioeconomic context. A lot of data streams will go up and there'll be a real innovation on that angle happens. Finally, to touch it, this entire domain with DPSIR framework, because we all know entire system analysis relies on DPSIR framework, wherein you have drivers, then you are connected to the pressures, which brings to a state, and that makes impacts, and you have response situations. When the total analysis of all the SDG indicators shows that there's a pyramid, means there are state indicators which fall into the category of state 41%, response 32, like that. There is an example, there it's a 14.6.1, which is a case for illegal fishing. They used nighttime data image. We have sensors which actually maps the nighttime lights. So these nighttime lights can be used for several parameters, maybe around 14. Out of them, one is about moving the boats in the night illegally. So that actually captures the illegal fishing parameterization. So this kind of response can be measured in the DPSIR framework and which becomes a feed to the SDG realization. So this kind of DPSIR analysis put in a context using SDG and EO will give us a lot of edge over the current state of understanding anything in isolation. Just understanding EO data in isolation or just understanding SDG indicator in isolation, we can jump beyond that and really get into a very interesting situation. So in conclusion, I'd like to tell that we need to consider more parameters that will actually strengthen the indicators, and they have relevance to EO also as well. Then we need more and more dashboards which shows us dynamically what's happening, what's being measured. Then since WebGIS is developing very fast, remote sensing applications which are getting through them will actually enrich the assessment finally, because the person who also maybe bit aware about SDG, bit about EO, he will get a real strengthening while he gets into these kind of WebGIS systems. Finally, you need to understand how much you are going to invest to measure an SDG indicator thoroughly. So we need to understand how much money we need. So finally, as a orientation from the ISRO policy side, since a lot of enterprise startups, those things are going to be into the space technology ecosystem, those ecosystem components have to be reoriented to SDG measurement. Then there'll be a lot of generation of the employment, plus you can add value to whatever we are generating as a sensor or a data or an information system or a modeling interface. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pujara. I think it's a very, very interesting presentation from Indian Space Research Organization. In fact, we are also working on Earth observation technology in our own work. We are monitoring air pollution in Bihar and few states using geospatial AI, artificial intelligence, to map hotspots of air pollution. So
EO data or IoT based?
Both AI and IoT. Yeah. IoT.
It's not NPP, Suomi or any of those kind
No,
of...
no, it's Airbus data. We are using with University of Nottingham has a database. So it's air pollution database, and we are monitoring from the brick kilns.
Okay, okay.
Right. So I think it's very, very interesting in terms of the applications of observation technology in multiple areas. MNREGA, you said also about Jal Shakti Ministry. I think how the data contributes to monitoring SDGs. I think that's very, very, very important. Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, later. Yeah, sure. So in the interest of time, we can move to the next presentation by Dr. Namesh Kilemseti from the OP Jindal Global University. He'll be talking about adaptive and anticipatory governance in Asia. Mismatch between policy problems and their solutions. I'd like to request the speaker to just to keep 10 minutes in the interest of time. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'll be taking a slightly different route to the previous presentations by going on a more theoretical approach, so please bear with me. And also, in the interest of time, I'll stick to my notes to make sure that I'll finish in the stipulated time. So, my name is Namesh Kilamsetti, and I'm an assistant professor of public policy at the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, and a member of the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. I, along with my co-author, Dr. Naresh Singh, we are glad to be here, and we thank TIFAC and IIASA to give us this opportunity to present our work. This particular study on complexity and public policy is our attempt to understand the need to bring the necessary arrangements in how governance works by looking at the framework of complex adaptive systems to make it anticipatory and adaptive. So we are using this presentation to elaborate our broad idea at this time and are thus open to suggestions and discussions. The primary objective of the study is to identify the necessary adjustments in government arrangements to address the multiple challenges of complexities in today's world. By reviewing the differences between the conventional policy making and planning, we introduce the concept of anticipatory governance and tools within it for anticipation and resilience, and case studies of how anticipatory governance has been applied in diverse contexts. Before talking about anticipatory and adaptive form of governance, the first question we need to address is identify the linkages between complexity and governance and discuss how current systems of governance are today struggling with complexity. Developing countries in the global south, including that of India, are primarily confronted with multiple complex, fast-moving challenges that strain the capacity of existing governance structures. Such challenges are worsened in the event of unexpected epidemics like that of COVID-19, and that could also lead to economic crisis that challenge the functioning of the governance at all political levels. Today's governance can be associated with being in what we call as a VUCA condition, that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The result is the presence of a governance and a decision-making system through performance rewards that relies on performance rewards and punishment mechanisms that could be demoralizing, slow, and wasteful. From the perspective of governance, there are three primary characteristics of what we call as wicked problems when we look at it from the context of governance. The first is that of social pluralism, so where the problems involve a diverse range of stakeholders with different interests. There is a conflict between different interests, and stakeholders are endemic due to polyrationality, and stakeholders have different capacities to exert political influence. There is institutional complexity, where problems require coordination at different levels of governance, including national, state, and local. And long-term thinking can be undermined by short political mandates and bargaining. Finally, when we talk of scientific uncertainty, the dimensions of government are complex and contested. There is no clear evidence of what we call as best practices, and information required to make policy changes is fragmented and show gaps of reliable knowledge. There is extensive literature on the need for understanding governance through a complexity lens, especially of that in the global south. Just to take a couple of examples, one study, there are studies that understand the climate change adaptation policies and found, which focused on South Asia, and found that the lack of scalability was the biggest issue, for which they believed policy approaches such as robust decision-making and adaptation pathways can be useful for long-term climate change adaptation. Similarly, in the case study of Singapore, scholars highlighted how complexity theory has influenced policy and practice by taking training programs for civil service through a complexity perspective using agent-based modeling and Sinefin framework analysis. Therefore, keeping all of these factors in mind, the concept of anticipatory governance comes into existence. Excuse me, the system has restarted.
There's a little bit of glitch. Just spare us some time. Just 2 minutes.
Dr. Namesh, if you can explain the slides, I mean, you don't need to. Yeah, sure. It's fine because we are running quite a bit of late.
Okay, so
yeah.
All right. Anyways, so the issues of complexity, in the modern world.
Just for you, different channels. What happened exactly?
It just restarted by itself.
Just let me sign in. Sorry.
I think it's fine. You can leave it. I think he can explain orally. Yeah.
Sure.
There are two other speakers waiting actually. Yeah.
So anticipatory governance takes its concepts from this idea of anticipatory democracy, and it believes in the need of governments to be prepared for any kind of emergencies. The idea of anticipatory governance is evolved as a systems-based approach to manage complex challenges and opportunities with adaptations to existing systems built for complex problems. This understanding of anticipatory governance has three major components. This idea of the system of integrating foresight into the way we create and execute national policies, a networked system for orchestrating a whole of government management and budgeting to mission, and a feedback system to constantly measure consequences against expectations as a way to learn from experience and refresh policies. While there are different frameworks and tools that make a government anticipatory and adaptive, we highlight the specific use of approach to achieve anticipatory governance for efficient public service delivery. So human learning system is a form of bottom-up action research that relies on mutually supportive management practices where learning and collaboration create practical and desirable outcomes rather than hierarchical directives. The central premise of implementing the human learning system approach to understand governance would be with a prior assumption that the government cannot claim to have previous knowledge of the activities that would support the freedom of and flourishing of the people it serves. It instead relies on decision-making by promoting continuous learning and identifying new forms of interactions with stakeholders, leading to long-term policy-making through improved collaboration. Human learning systems has been applied across institutions and organizations globally. Some of the notable examples of the use of HLS includes that of Scotland's Healthcare Improvement Hub that developed a learning system to understand how the health and social care systems of Scotland were responding to COVID-19, and that of the Finnish National Agency for Education that used this HLS with an objective to improve the quality of learning by enabling the adoption of an experimentation culture. These two examples I just shared are from developed countries which are much more open to such kind of changes and interventions as compared to countries such as that of India, where the traditional Weberian form of bureaucracy dictates the performance of governance structures. We firmly believe that human learning system has the potential to improve the understanding of governance and its effectiveness in countries of the global south, even such as that of India. Based on the experiences of implementing this approach at the local, regional, and global levels, we at our center, we recently completed a pilot study to understand how human learning systems can be incorporated in Indian system of public service delivery and management, and to understand what difference it makes. By interviewing around 30 civil servants and civil society organizations, we aim to develop an understanding of how public service is managed and delivered in India, and how accommodative people are of the ideas of HLS. By conducting primary interviews with government officials, non-private organizations, and the private sector. We actually present the findings of this pilot study in a different poster in this very conference later on. However, in this paper, to conclude, what I wanted to actually discuss is the basic need of the hour. That is a fundamental shift in the way of how we govern ourselves. For that to happen, there needs to be a move away from the command and control management that is generally performed by Weberian bureaucrats within a centralized national bureaucracy towards towards a typical characteristic of anticipatory governance that includes public-private partnerships, collaborative efforts, policy entrepreneurs, and participatory initiatives usually gathered under the umbrella term of governance. Throughout the study, we argue the need to shift focus from studying the character and new patterns to a research agenda that elaborates the problem-solving capacity of existing multi-level governance systems using HLS that takes note of change characterized by non-linear dynamics, threshold effects, and limited predictability. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed the scale of inequality in people's experience and put a spotlight on how the health and the social system and social structures can widely reinforce these inequalities in developing countries like that of India. Under such a situation, the presence of a feedback loop in the policy-making process ensures that the governance structures are not only participatory, but also provide a platform for the marginalized sections of the society to share their concerns and their preferences. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Namesh. And apologies for the technical issues that we had. Right, right. I think this particular presentation elaborated on how anticipatory governance, what kind of changes can help actually the current system of governance to transform into a better one. And he quoted examples from Singapore. And also we have in UNDP, we have an anticipatory governance project. So in fact, we are working with Telangana government in terms of especially connecting the farmers and telling the farmers in terms of what kind of weather predictions we have in future so that the cropping pattern has to change. So that's a very interesting experiment. And in fact, the Telangana government is one of the pioneering governments in India, which has actually taken anticipatory governance quite seriously. And we are working with them at the Asia level. So thanks, Dr. Namesh. Again, it's very, very interesting. Unfortunately, the PowerPoint didn't work. Otherwise, we would have spent some bit more time. So in the interest of time, again, we move to Dr. Suresh Surendran, who's from Prime A+ Institute, and also environmental risk and sustainable development expert from England. He'll be talking about system-based transformative approach for risk analysis and option appraisal for integrated decision-making on sustainable development at tiered level people councils. Over to you, Dr. Surendran. Can you hear us, Dr. Surendran? Sorry, your voice is not audible here.
So can you please unmute yourself?
Interestingly, we are talking about technology and SDGs in this session, and we are having so many challenges with technologies today. Can you call some IT person who can do that? I mean, Dr. Surendran, you have to unmute yourself if you can hear me. Again, you're muted. So can you unmute again? We can't. Pardon? Dr. Surendran, can you reconnect? Can you sign off and then sign in again? Try that. Is the next speaker online already? Because we can save some time if we can allow the other speaker.
I'm here.
We are trying to get the next speaker on.
Can you hear me? This is Mustafa speaking.
Yeah. I think he's here, Dr. Moinuddin.
Yes, I'm here.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, great. So I think we could go ahead with the next presentation. By the time I think Professor Surendran fixes the technical problem at his side. Dr. Mustafa Moinuddin will be talking about, he's representing the IGES, Japan, Institute of Global Environmental Strategies, and he'll be talking about integrating climate actions and sustainable development goals at the subnational scale, results from stakeholder consultation in West Java. Dr. Moinuddin, over to you, 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Can I share my slides from here? If that is okay?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, sir,
Okay.
that will be fine.
Okay, let me try to share my slides then.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep. Is it possible to upload the slide, please?
Okay.
Professor Surendran, I think since we lost you briefly, we thought it will take time, so we allowed the next speaker to speak. So I think in 10 minutes, you could start your presentation, if it is okay with you.
By the way, I sent some message through chat about uploading slides and so on. I don't know whether you guys are reading your chat.
I'll just check with the team. Yes, I think they are. So we will go ahead with the Dr. Moinuddin's presentation, and in 10 minutes, we can reconnect to Professor Surendran. Thank you. Mr. Moinuddin, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Once again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, everybody. My name is Mustafa. I work as the Deputy Director of the Integrated Sustainability Center at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. We are based in Japan. And today I'm going to talk about one of our studies related to integrating climate actions and their sustainable development goals at the subnational scale. Basically, as you know, that there are multiple interlinkages between climate actions and the SDGs, and some of these interlinkages can be reinforcing, meaning that actions taken on one side can have positive impact on the other side, and sometimes it can be conflicting, which means that one action can actually regress the other action, and this can kind of interchangeable between climate actions and SDGs. So in order to implement climate actions while achieving the SDGs, we need to have a systems approach to address these trade-offs and to leverage the synergies. And this issue is particularly relevant at the local level, where integrated planning is feasible because of the smaller size of the administrative units, as well as a lesser number of agencies involved, and also because of limited availability of financial and other resources such as human resources. But this integrated policymaking is quite often absent at local levels because of a variety of reasons. And in our study, with this background, we wanted to develop a qualitative approach to identify the synergies and trade-offs between climate actions and the SDGs by involving local stakeholders, through local stakeholders engagement. And we chose Indonesian province of West Java for our empirical analysis because of Indonesia's diversity and because of the country's commitment to climate and the SDGs agenda. We took, for methodology, we used stakeholders consultation, which consisted of two parts. One is a questionnaire-based online survey, Another one is a focus group discussions with a smaller group of experts. I will come back to it in a minute, but before that, let me talk a little bit about the potential impact that we are expecting. We believe that by integrating the local context through stakeholders' engagement, the results of the study can be used to support practical policymaking based on a systems approach at the local levels. This study, I just led the study, but we also partnered with the Center for Sustainable Development Studies, Development Goal Studies, the SDG Center at the University of Pajajaran in Bandung, Indonesia, which is located in West Java, but the province where our study has been conducted. So I just took the lead, but we worked together jointly. We developed this study jointly. Even before we conducted this study, we were actually already involved in contributing to SDG processes in Indonesia. At IGS, we developed a tool, a quantitative tool known as IGS SDG Interlinkages Analysis and Visualization Tool, which can help us identify, quantify, analyze, and visualize the interlinkages among the SDGs. This methodology was used to develop several parts of Indonesia's national SDGs roadmap, as well as the voluntary national reviews of 2019 and 2021. So yeah, we have already been involved into like SDG processes in Indonesia, even before this study. Coming back to the current study on stakeholders consultation, as I mentioned earlier, there are two parts in it. First is a questionnaire-based online survey. Where we had about 100 participants from various sectors. I'll come back to it again for this. And we focused on identifying the local perspectives on the issues, challenges, and priorities of SDGs and climate change planning and implementation in the province of West Java. All the participants were carefully selected by our partner, the SDGs Center, and then the results were compiled and analyzed by IGS and the SDGs Center. After the online survey, this was followed up with a focus group discussion to validate the survey results as well as to receive feedback. And we had around 20 participants, 20 experts and all of them were actually part of the online survey as well. We conducted a deep down theme-based discussion of the results from the survey to clarify some of the results and also to identify the most important issues in West Java, particularly in the areas of economic, environmental, social, and climate change related spheres. Based on this stakeholders consultation, we already published a discussion paper and we are conducting further SDG interlinkages analysis to prepare an academic paper, which will be published very soon. So here is like a glimpse of the process of how we combine the survey and the focus group discussion. So we had this online questionnaire survey, and once this was finished, we compiled all the survey results together and then used it for the focus group discussions with 20 experts. And these experts, they identified the core issues and problems specifically in the context of West Java in terms of economy, society, environment, as well as governance. I want to give you a snapshot of the topics that we covered in the survey questionnaire. We first wanted to know a little bit about the participants, their background, whether they're working in their work is related to SDGs and climate actions or not, then how they think about the relationships between the national and sub-national level planning, and how the SDG planning and implementation is taking place at the provincial level, which agencies are involved, whether stakeholders are involved in it or not, and the major progresses that SDG implementation in West Java has taken place until now. Then we also wanted to know more substantial issues related to like the structure of the economy, major agriculture, industry, and service sectors in West Java, and like the major economic, social, environmental, climate, and governance-related issues and challenges in the province, and their linkages with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And specific questions were related to whether climate change is relevant for West Java or not, how the survey participants perceive of climate change for West Java. So we had, you can see that the survey we had for the survey, we had multi-stakeholders participation, an overwhelming share coming from the government side, which was intentional because we wanted to learn more about the planning and implementation, particularly from the policymakers and practitioners. But we also had participants from the NGOs, from the education and research institutions, service providers, as well as others. And of course, they all come from like different fields with different areas of work, and their priorities are also different, which was reflected in the survey responses. Then I don't want to like give all the details of the survey responses, but let's briefly talk about the core issues and the problems that were identified by the experts in the focus group discussion making. For economy, on the economic side, some of the important issues that were identified include lack of job opportunity, as well as over-dependence on the informal sector. On the society side, low human resources quality, which is also linked with education services quality, socioeconomic and social and economic inequalities, gender inequalities, and so on. These are found to be were identified to be the most relevant one for West Java. Pollution and inefficient resource use were the major issues related to environment and climate change. And finally, for governance, corruption was found to be the single most important problem in West Java. Here, I want to show the interlinkages of the key economic, social, environmental, and governance-related issues linked with climate change for West Java, specifically for West Java that we identified. In the economic side, two major issues were found, in particular, economic growth and stability, as well as infrastructure, that are very strongly linked with SDG 13 on climate actions. If we move on to the society and community side, there are many social issues linked with climate actions, but roughly a third of the respondents also highlighted access to energy as the most important area. Many of the environmental issues are linked with climate actions and other SDGs, and climate actions itself was linked with several SDG areas, including health, water, poverty and hunger, energy, and biodiversity. And finally, on the governance side, rule of law and relations with the central government are found to be highly relevant in West Java's climate actions. I'm towards the end of my presentation. I try to keep it simple and short. But I want to talk a little bit about the main takeaways from our study. This overlapping nature of sustainable development and climate actions actually require policymakers to integrate and co-develop their implementation plans while taking into consideration the local context in particular. And that's why it is important to understand the interactions between SDGs and climate actions and to reflect it in the their development plans and policies. And we believe that the results of our stakeholders consultation can help shape the design of this integrated approach, as it is important to incorporate the socioeconomic and biophysical characteristics of the local area of field concern, as well as the priorities and challenges facing that specific area within the broader national development plans. This integrated approach can help bridge the gap between national and local policy processes, and therefore it's important to provide sufficient support for localizing the SDGs and climate actions through enabling conditions, particularly governance, institutional arrangements, and clarified budget lines. We also think that empowering the civil society can help boost accountability, particularly for spending and policy decisions. And finally, I think the knowledge gained through this exercise, this study will be quite useful for science-based studies. For example, an in-depth SDG interlinkages analysis study, which we are conducting at the moment. And this can help this can provide important insights and support for local policy processes through the development of the voluntary local reviews. Furthermore, the experience from this stakeholder engagement activity is expected to feed into similar activities in other regions, cities, and provinces within and beyond Indonesia. So basically, that's it from my presentation. I'd also like to share the links to some of the resources and outputs that we developed. In particular, the middle one is the SDG interlinkages tool that we developed, and it is freely available online. Anybody can access it and use it. I don't have time to discuss the details about it, but please feel free to visit the site and take a look at it. It has been used for like policy processes in several countries already. The first one is kind of like a research report or like a technical description of the tool itself. And the third one you see is a report that we developed based on the stakeholders consultation that we conducted in West Java. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Moinuddin. That's an excellent presentation again. Again, when it comes to SDGs, we cannot look at in isolation. Interlinkages are very, very important in terms of identifying the potential impacts in terms of governance issues. And I think this tool is very exciting. We will definitely try that. And in fact, to see what kind of governance at the national and local levels, especially in terms of different sectors like food, agriculture, energy, water, on all this, like we in UN, we focus on water, energy, food as a main interlinkage nexus, and including that layers of governance and also local and national level governance layers will be a very interesting approach to look into all this, SDG related tracking the progress. So thanks very much for that presentation. And so then we will move to the last presenter of the day, Professor Suresh Surendran, who's from the Prime EA Institute from the United Kingdom. He'll be focusing on system-based transformative approach for risk analysis and option appraisal for integrated decision-making on sustainable development at tiered level people councils. I think he'll be presenting the UK experience in terms of risk analysis and option appraisal. So over to you, Professor Surendran.
Oh, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yep. And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Right. Okay. What I'm going to do today is, as the chair said, I will be talking about a system-based approach for assessing the risk and appraising the option for integrated decision making, particularly related to sustainable development. And based on my research in UK academic, as well as work for Department of Environment as a principal scientist. So I'm going to put together and trying to solve some problem in Sri Lanka. There are a number of co-authors involved and they all acknowledged. Okay. I'm going to talk a bit of a introduction or background. In the world, currently, most of the people, whether they are from whatever country, whatever region, whether what language they speak, what culture, religion, or what kind of a political background they have or philosophy they have, they all, most of them are suffering from political, legal, socio-economic, environmental issues. This is mainly they are struggling due to a number of reasons, like they are fighting for imperialism, militarization. This is mainly due to lack of democracy. Again, nationalism, racism, majoritism, these kind of things. This is predominantly due to the power is not devolved to the people's level. And third one is a lot of environmental issues, social issues, economic issues, and so on. So there is a need for a development that is lacking, particularly in policy, process, science, technology development. Why that one is happening, this one in particularly in developing countries, is number of reasons. Number one is there is no proper policies exist. And even again, the program is not appropriate program and also not delivered by appropriate people and appropriate reason and so on. And also there is a big problem in developing countries is huge commission-based, bribery, corruption-based culture. So therefore, if a lobbying group, they want to do something, then they can make it happen using money that may or may not relevant to the people. So you all know the problems happening in Sri Lanka. Whatever I mentioned previously, that is true for Sri Lanka as well. We started about a few months ago, economic problem, and there is not much available and also affordable food, fuel, and so on. So those are the issues we had. Then economic problem converted into a political and social problem. The big issue is in Sri Lanka or most of the developing countries, the government and government institution is failed to consult people. We got independent about 74 years ago, and still not proper consultation happen at the citizen level and not produce any evidence-based policies process. So this thing. And also the parliament is not reflect people's aspirations or needs. So the constitution, again, whatever these countries has, and institution also play a major part for these failures and so on. Now it's creating constitutional issues in Sri Lanka, and possibly it can be a disaster as well. Okay. So how you are going to solve this problem? Two ways that people are trying to solve at the moment in Sri Lanka. One is a reactive action, and other one is some kind of a strategic path. What is, say for an example, currently the citizens all reacting due to the current situation. They have peaceful protest. To use this one as a platform to let others know, particularly challenge or support parliament via campaign like the president to go, prime minister to go, and so on. So I'm not going to talk about this reactive one. In the meantime, in Sri Lanka, there is a development within the citizen group on developing a people council as a strategic solution. Traditionally, if you take parliament, you have legislative body and also your court system and executive one. There's the 3 tiers. Here people are talking they need a 4th leg because it's a corrupted country and with 3 legs tool it can't sustain. We need additional one, that is the People's Voice People Council. So this is the situation. How the People Council going to be? There is a lot of speculations. A lot of people are thinking. What I am going to produce is my view. And basically what I think is we need to have a number of units in this People Council. The first one is a research-based know-how transfer think tank unit. That's necessary for policy process development. at the local level, different level I'll talk about. The second one is campaign and advocacy networking and that kind of unit that is common in various countries. And the third one is whether the local people itself identify the problems and implement the solution, operate, maintain the projects, though that involve finance and so on. So why these important? As I mentioned to you, there is a need for challenge and support Parliament and other institutions. It's not going to replace the Parliament, and people are talking about regime change won't be a solution because the problem in system. But if the system is fully corrupted, we can't change the system, so therefore there is a parallel system necessary until people understand what is this parallel system, then the system change could happen. So challenging not only the Parliament in the national level, provincial level, the provincial council, and again Pradesh Sabha or district level as well as local level, that is assistant government agent division, or we call Pradesh Sabha, or village level. So therefore, people need relevant capabilities and decision-making capabilities. So I'm not going to talk about advocacy and operation and maintenance. Again, I want to narrow down my talk to research-based know-how transfer and think tank, what this is trying to do. So this is a key part of People Council, and this is going to play a part in local, district, provincial level for purpose of changing people's attitude, improve ability to communicate and implement the sustainable development goal. That's very important. So I mentioned to you a number of things in the sense I mentioned previously: democracy, devolution, and development. All these three things could be packed or tackled by Sustainable Development Goal. So the mission is basically what we want to do is to develop necessary tools, techniques to produce. The mission is basically to come up with some kind of a model for research-based knowledge and technology transfer think tank to benefit socio-culture, built environment, built and natural environment, and also ethos economy, not neoliberal. I'm talking about the ethos of the country and the society and the economy and political legal side, and the previous presenter talked about that as a governance. So therefore, what we need is to give some benefit to people, planet, prosperity, and peace as partnership initiative. So what we're trying to do is three things. End of the day, we need a think tank. The think tank should be top-down and bottom-up. Lot of research done on top-down. There is less work done on bottom-up. What is the problem of the people? We know what politicians' version of people's problem, or the government, or highly educated intellectuals' point of view, but not the layman point of view. What is his problem? What is his option? What response he would like to take, or he would like to take. So the top-down is there. There is no top-down, bottom-up. So we need a research to collect research and information about bottom-up ideas. Finally, who is going to do? It's not the highly educated people. This is the village people and so on they want to do. So therefore, they need some know-how to understand number of issues. Then they could develop some decisions wisely. So therefore, thematic objectives, there is 4 objectives. One is sustainable political-legal development and sustainable socio-cultural, sustainable ethos economics, and sustainable environmental development to benefit by a number of stakeholders or number of receptors. So again, as previous one, I had my own definition. When I talk about political-legal, that include number of sustainable development goal, gender equality, reduce inequality, peace, justice, and so on, and global partnership, geopolitics, and so on. The second one is socio-culture, education, health, and sustainable community is part of that. Again, ethos economic, no poverty, hunger, this kind of things, and industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Here we are talking about entrepreneurships, skills, and various other things. And finally, whether the GDP-based economy is the right way to go, or the neoliberal way is the right way to go, because it's a good example in Sri Lanka. Now we have no money, we cut off from international one, there is no local product because we rely on export, import, one basic things you can't get it locally. So think about different one. And GDP, not only GDP, we're talking about happy index and so on. Finally, the environmental one, here you are talking about water, sanitation, clean energy. This is talking about utilities and resource consumption, climate change and disasters and risk resilience. And finally, life below water and life on water. So what we are going to do is there is a tiered level approach. Local level, basically village level, they identify the problem. Again, the local authority level or the pressures. Yeah.
Can we end up in 3 minutes? Yeah. So
5 minutes. Yeah.
5 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And local level, then district level, basically a networking, and also different tiers. I don't want to go into more details. There are a number of stakeholders. And my main thing I'm planning to do within 3 minutes, the main thing is how we are going to make the people to take the decision and make policies and process that should be system-based, risk-focused, and tiered way. I don't want to talk about definition of policies. This is basically using the ancient Buddhist or Siddha or Ayurvedic concept. First, you have to accept there is a issues problem formation. The second one, you identify the cause, source, pathway, receptors of the problem. Then you find the options. And finally, you set up a path to solve the problem. So this is several years ago, Buddha preached that one, we all know that. So therefore, problem formation, risk assessment, appraisal, and addressing the risk. So how we are going to do is to using normal questionnaires and so on. In problem formation, this all stage stakeholders are involved. Problem formation, you ask a question on what decision you are doing, what are the issues, understand the system, state of the system, current state of the system, system and future status of the system. Someone talk about that as well. Identify who are the receptors, what are the source, different pathways, understand the current pressures and futures, and finally you have a lot of problems coming up from the village or the rural system. Then you screen it and collect number of problems, which is key, and form the problems. Risk assessment, again, you use estimate probabilities, consequence, and not only the current one, but also you foresight the future risk as well. End of the day, you have these all, you know, these metrics, consequence and likelihood. Either you can do numbers or you can put high, medium, low. High probability, medium probability, low probability, high consequence, medium consequence, and low consequence. So based on that, high probability and high consequence is your priority, and less consequence and less probability, you are not interested at all. Again, we are living in a world because you can't forecast using the trend, because we are living in a dynamic world. Therefore, scenario-based foresight. I was part of UK government to develop foresight scenario, risk-based scenario, and also work with Americans on the scenario base. Basically, the governance, whether the governance is going to be sustainable led, international focus, interdependent governance, or the local one. Whether the consumers, the government, how that's going to move. Again, consumers, how they're going to use more profit, material-oriented or value-oriented. I could give the example, but no time. I'm going to move on. So based on that, identify what is the key risk, current and futures. Then next, the option appraisal. Again, what you do is to ask the community to identify what are the options for the risk they identified, and then use the sustainability criteria on social, regulatory acceptability, cost and economic effectiveness, environmental science management technologies, and so on. And also you think about different, not only everything we can solve, some we can terminate, some mitigate, some we can transfer the thing, exploit and accept. And the final one is a risk management. So based on whatever there, then people, this is simple question is you ask the problem formation, risk assessment, option appraisal, and finally you come up with the risk management, develop some kind of a plan, and again, problem formation at the local level, risk assessment at the local authorities level, district level, option appraisal, and the professional level, they come up with the response and developing strategies. So this could be not only just you can stop it, you do it and check it, monitor it and refine. If you can't refine, again, you go back to problem formation, risk assessment. It's a cyclic event, and so on. This is the last slide. So this is the DIPSO one, someone similar kind of model they did. First, this one we developed. I manage this one for flood management in UK or England. There is a catchment management system, coastal management system, estuary management system. Some are integrated. So you understand your system, current system. So you understand what is the source of the risk for this flooding and erosion, and who are affected, what are the pathways, what pathways stop, like if you have a bund or weir or something that stop the flooding, so that could fail, then you understand the system, then you understand what are the drivers, how it's going to change the risk in future, again you come up with, then finally you do a risk assessment and option appraisal and so on. That's all, guys, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Surendran. I think it's a very complex system that you're proposing, but it's very interesting in terms of applications, especially the bottom-up approach in the form of People's Council. I think that's a very interesting approach, but we need to look at how to operationalize this and how to get the buy-in from all the layers of the society. So I think
we will discuss that one.
That would be a very interesting model to look at. And thank you very much for sharing your perspectives. With this, we came to the conclusion of today's sessions, and we have in fact had 6 presentations. Some of them focused on technology, some of them focused on policy, some of them, the last presentation focused on the foresight, and also looking at creating something like a bottom-up structure for transformational changes to happen. So this is something I would say, personally, I felt it very, very interesting in terms of technology, looking at technology not as a standalone element. It should be integrated, it should be interlinked with the different stakeholders, and how policy systems and governance systems can leverage the potential of technology and the entire ecosystem surrounding that. So I feel I have learned a lot personally looking at these 6 presentations, and also unfortunately we didn't have time for the question and answer because we started quite late and we had to finish already. We exceeded 1 hour of the allotted time. I sincerely apologize on behalf of the organizers for the delay. Thank you so much for your patience and also for active listening till now, even though it is delayed. Over to the organizers. Thank you.
So I would request Dr. Raghavan to be seated for just 1 or 2 minutes. So as we have reached the ending of the session, I would once again like to thank each one of you for gracing us with your presence. But before we part ways, on behalf of TIFAC-IIASA, we would like to felicitate you for being our honorable speakers for the day. For speakers joined virtually, I express my appreciation for your valuable contribution to our conference. Due to some fixed commitments, Dr. Dorsami Pillai won't be present here, and on the behalf of Doctor, we'll be having Ms. Sherry to give the token of appreciation. So yeah, so I would request Ms. Sherry to come up on stage for this one last time and give the token of appreciation to Dr. Raghavan, Head of Exploration Accelerator Lab, UNDP. I would like to invite you one by one. I would request Shri Jayadeva Hiranya to come up on stage and please take the token of appreciation. Thank you. I would request Dr. Girish Puja to please come up on stage and please take your token of appreciation. Thank you, sir. I would like to call Dr. Namesh Kilamsetti to please come up on stage. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And it was our pleasure to have you with us. And I extend my sincere gratitude to each one of you. Thank you for joining us. There will be a 15 minutes of tea break. You all can join the tea session. Okay. Yes, since we are running late, we will just cut it down to 10 minutes.
kind attention, distinguished participants. Today, after listening to the whole day, now we have come to the concluding session for day one. We have got a panel discussion on an important topic, that is application of systems analysis in policy, institutions, and market mechanisms, an Asian perspective. And today we have luminaries in our panelists. I would like to call upon Dr. Kirit Parikh, first panelist for this session. I think Dr. Kirit Parikh needs no introduction. He has been backbone of TIFAC, and he was associated with many programs of TIFAC and guiding us in all our initiatives. Briefly, I introduce Dr. Parikh. Dr. Kirit Parikh is the chairman of Integrated Research and Action for Development, IRIDE. He was honored with Padma Bhushan and shared the Nobel Prize in 2007 given to IPCC authors. He was a member of the Economic Advisory Council, EAC, and Planning Commission in charge of energy, water, and prospective planning. He was the principal architect of India's official integrated energy policy and also an expert group report on the low carbon strategy for the inclusive growth. Sir, please be seated. Thank you so much. And next, I call the next panelist, Ritik Shukla. He is a senior research associate in Accountability Initiative at Center of Policy Research. Ritik primarily works on issues related to governance, process, implementation, and capacity within the social sector. His focus has been on nutrition, health, and education. His research interests include public economics, public policy, development, and political economy. Yeah, Mr. Shukla. Is there? And our third panelist is Dr. Kaveri Chitriya, is an assistant professor at the School of Public Policy at IIT Delhi. Kaveri's research is focused on transition of energy and related sectors in the context of climate change under deep uncertainty. She approaches public problems from the lenses of complex socio-technical systems, institutional analysis, and systems thinking and economics. Yeah, Ms. Kaveri, please. Our next panelist is Dr. Rana Mukherjee. He is currently working as Associate Professor at ICFAI University. Dr. Rana is presently the Director Research and Development Cell of the university. Mr. Rana, please. And another panelist for today is Ms. Ritu Mathur. She is a Senior Energy Consultant, Niti Aayog. Ms. Mathur, please. And the only panelist who is joining online virtually is Mr. Sanjeev Kumar Vachne. He is the head of the International Scientific Cooperation in the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Dr. Sanjeev is facilitating international scientific cooperation from the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, with its bilateral, multilateral, and regional scientific partners. So, sir, you can now start panel discussion. That's the thing, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
I will begin with describing what is systems analysis. Some years ago, actually the second director of IIASA in late 70s defined systems analysis as something that addresses policy-oriented research. It is quantitative. It is multidisciplinary. It involves modeling, etc., etc. He gave a number of other attributes. But then he says, but it does not necessarily, each study doesn't necessarily have to involve all these. This was Roger Levian, who was the director then of IIASA. So I think this is really an interesting way to look at it. And I think we have to understand in what ways in developing countries, particularly developing country democracies, this will be different. And I think there is also another issue about general equilibrium modeling. What an economist would consider is meeting is quantitative. It is takes care of all the different disciplines, like your technology assumptions, that is in a production function embodied in it, and you have demand by different income classes, agents, and entrepreneurs maximize their profit. So all these things require that, yes, there are many stakeholders, many multidisciplinary person, and that really is a quantitative approach to this. But at the end, there is also something called system dynamics. And I remember in this at IIASA, I had a long discussion about general equilibrium approach and a systems dynamics approach with the high priestess of systems dynamics, Donella Meadows. And she said, but there is never an equilibrium in the market. And I said, yes, that is true. But equilibrium as an aggregate description of market over a number of time period, a larger time period, is perhaps a very effective and a efficient way of describing how things work. So for example, if I take a systems dynamics model and run it almost every day, and I have all the stocks get built up with different agents, and then they decide what it needs to be done, that would eventually lead to something like a general equilibrium model. But anyway, that was a discussion we had. And I thought one should really bring this out to get some idea and feel for what systems analysis is about. At IRADE, for example, Integrated Research and Action for Development, which is our non-profit, non-governmental, independent research institute, we are doing studies. Mostly they are policy-oriented, multidisciplinary, and multi-stakeholder. And I understand that 3 of my colleagues are going to present these results here. Anjana Das is going to talk about net zero. And net zero is really something that combines technology, microeconomics, macroeconomics, all this together. And then Prabal Ghosh is going to talk about EV charging impact on grid. So we said, okay, if EVs grow up, how would it affect Delhi's grid? So we did studies of surveys, what is people's charging behavior, and combine it and to understand this, what it could mean for Delhi's grid. Would they need more peak power and so on and so forth. And the third study is going to be climate change adaptive action plans for heat stress. Because this is really, now we have seen that heat stress has become a very important thing. And here there are many actors involved, many institutions involved. So we do a study, say, for a city, and then we talk to all the various concerned agencies and say really what they need to do and how can they do it. So anyway, these are some of the things that the IRADE is doing. But I would say that what is the essential difference between development systems analysis for a developed country and systems analysis for a developing country? I think we often know, or the politicians or decision makers know, what reforms are needed, what decision they should take it. But then they're concerned that if they make these reforms, would they get elected in the next election? And that is what we have seen when the farmers agitated and the government had to back down. What the government was proposing was a very sensible reforms of the agricultural policy. So I think this is really very important thing, that you understand all the different stakeholders, interest groups, and understand who has the power to stop this and even try to create policy instruments or measures which should be simultaneously implemented, and so that you can take care of almost, it should be win-win for all the stakeholders. And that's really a critical element for, in my opinion, for using systems analysis in a developing country. I think what we need to bring it forward, the current way in which we do systems analysis, is to bring in the political economy dimension into systems analysis. Because what you have to understand, this is my suggestion for a policy. Who will be affected how much? And would they have the power to do this? Or can I think of a policy so that the effect on them is positive rather than negative? And one could think about many ways in which you can have a win-win policies that they could do for others. So I think this is just a brief introduction to what I think is a critical element in systems analysis. And one can go on for a long, I can give illustrations and examples of how we have done this, but I think time is short. So I would call the next speaker. I don't have the list of people, Peter. I thought this was the list. Who is the next one? Can someone give me the program? Hello? In my bag, there is one. Show brought the bag up.
Repetier called for by order Dr. Kaveri, then Ritvik, then Ranam.
Thanks, Ankita. Okay, I invite Dr. Ritvik Shukla, the Senior Research Associate, Accountability Initiative Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. I think given the time shortage, we should all try to finish within less than 10 minutes.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Parekh. Not Dr. Ritvik, it's Mr. Ritvik. No PhD yet. But today, I want to bring in a slightly different perspective on systems analysis and also build a little bit from what Dr. Parekh has introduced for all of us. So one of the main things when we look at systems is to really get deep into it, right? I think it's very important to deep dive into systems. My work has largely focused on public service delivery, and this is across sectors. And you can look at social services, for example, health and nutrition, and we have SDG goals linked to that. You can look at livelihoods, and you have no poverty as a goal linked to that. You have education, you have clean water and sanitation, and you have a number of things and a number of goals to which we are trying to move towards. And governments, especially in developing countries and especially in our country, there are a number of public services that they provide, a number of schemes and programs that are run by various departments, by various ministries across levels. It's not just at the union level, it's also at state level. States have their own programs which are distinct from the union government. And you also have initiatives taken at local levels by local governments, panchayats, by municipalities. Now, given that we have all these goals, and one key factor in all of this becomes how do we measure our progress, right? We have targets. We have to achieve this by 2025. We have to achieve this by 2030. They might be extended, they may not be. But essentially what we end up looking at is one major thing. We look at outcome variables, right? What are these outcome variables? For example, if you're looking at health and nutrition, then one kind of outcome variable will be how many children in the country are stunted or wasted, or how many are malnourished, to put it more simply. You may look at what are the learning outcomes of the country. How are children performing on various learning tests? Are they absorbing what is being done in class? Or rather, to put it differently, are we able to teach them what we want to teach them effectively, right? You can look at, if you're looking at something like poverty, then you want to see whether there's been a change in consumption patterns, there's been a change in rural incomes. And these are some of the major outcome variables that we're looking at. There are large-scale surveys that happen that try and pin down these variables. A second related set of data is coverage data. So when you look at coverage, you see how many people, essentially you're looking at the question, how many people received a particular service from the government? And then of course, you're looking at whether they got it in the way they were supposed to get it as per the guidelines. Was the quality adequate of the particular service? So for example, how many children are enrolled in schools? Did they receive textbooks? Did they receive free textbooks? Are they getting scholarships? In the context of health and nutrition, you could see how many children are getting IFA and vitamin A supplements, iron supplements, how many are receiving supplementary nutrition in schools, or in Anganwadi centers and in schools also actually. And then once if you see that coverage is low, so for example, if you see that not too many children are receiving these supplements and these things that they're supposed to receive, it leads to a logical link that outcomes might be poor because of this, right? Because these schemes are meant to improve outcomes ultimately. Now, what I want to talk about essentially are two key methods that we use to really try and unpack this data. So you might see an outcome variable that says like 33% children in India are stunted, or you might say that only 70% children in India receive services from an Anganwadi center, which are essentially centers in villages where health and nutrition services are given to children under 6 and to pregnant women as well. Now, you see these large numbers, but what's really going on within that, right? How do we go about unpacking the system that actually aims to improve coverage, that aims to improve outcomes? And it is unpacking that system that we have found is particularly useful in identifying challenges, identifying gaps, and understanding where things have been done well as well. A lot of states have actually improved their outcomes substantially, improved coverage substantially, and we should be learning from them as well. So there are the two key methods that I want to talk about. The first is on studying public finances, and the second is on understanding state capacity. And these two methods are sector agnostic. A lot of my colleagues on the panel over here are experts on climate change and related subjects, but this could be used to understand areas within that as well, and government schemes which aim to address the various challenges that climate change has brought upon us. They could be used to understand what's going on in the social sector, what's going on with health and nutrition, what's going on with education, right? So just to delve in a little bit into these, the first thing is to consider when one is looking at public finances, the main thing is to track public finances all the way from the top to the front line. So for a number of schemes, which are called centrally sponsored schemes, the union government funds a part of it, state governments fund a part of it. All this money goes into one pool, then it is given to districts, then to block, and then to frontline. So you can see that there's a very big chain that one has to sort of follow. And tracking funds through this cycle is particularly helpful in understanding, okay, where are we getting stuck? Is money reaching the places where it has to be spent on time? And generally what one finds is that if money reaches late, services aren't going to be provided. If services aren't provided, your outcomes aren't really going to change substantially. I'm talking about the public sector, it's written everywhere over here as well, in particular because that is the largest sort of way in which these outcomes are being achieved. That's where all the money is being spent. So the idea is to track funds through the policy cycle, from policy and budget formulation, which is the stage where the budget is created, to policy and budget execution, where you're releasing your money and you're spending. And then finally, evaluation to understand, okay, have we spent what we wanted to spend, right? And within this, what we basically want to understand is, what is the amount of money that we needed to achieve a particular outcome? Then given government constraints and given several priorities that the government has, how much have we been able to allocate? From what we've allocated, how much are we able to actually release on time to the places where it needs to be spent? And of course, there are a number of other administrative hurdles. It's not necessarily one party's fault if something doesn't go right. And then, of course, right at the end, how much has actually been spent, right? The second thing to understand in all of this is the role of the bureaucracies, the role of all the functionaries who are actually responsible for implementing all these schemes. So who are they, right? What is their interaction with the system, with other elements in the system? What are the challenges they face when they are part of that system? How do they receive information and how do they interpret it? How do they pass on information? What is their capacity? Are they overworked? A lot of officials have additional charges, which means they are overworked, right? So are they overworked? What are the rules that govern them, sometimes constrain them, sometimes even liberate them and give them authority to do what they want to do? And of course, to understand the means, motives, and opportunities available with these government functionaries, with the bureaucrats who are actually the backbone of any kind of public service delivery. And these methods, right? Tracking finances and tracking state capacity, you could use it for a variety of things. So very recently, the 15th Finance Commission has given grants for air pollution to municipalities and aims to support them in a bid to A, track the level of pollution, and B, also then think of mitigation strategies and ways to work around it. So how do we understand this, right? The one way of doing this would be to simply say that, okay, this is how much money they're getting. Then we have to go and ask them, how are you spending this money? How is it being used? What are the challenges you're facing in using them? And one critical challenge is that they've not received this quantum of money before. So there is a possibility, and I'm only saying this as a possibility, I'm not saying this as an eventuality. There is a possibility that some people might not be very sure of how this has to be spent, given the absence of clear guidelines. And the system functions on clear guidelines. And what we've noticed is for things and for line items in the budget for which there are very clear guidelines, this has to go for salary. This has to be spent on buying textbooks. You find that it is easier to spend. But where there is discretion given, where a lot of thought has to be put in, some confusion starts to seep in and money goes unspent. So that's another factor to really consider when you're looking at both finances and state capacity together. I want to give some examples, since this panel is about using a few examples of where studying finances and where understanding processes within the system is really helpful in sort of drilling deep down and understanding what's going on, and then trying to think about effective solutions. Because the devil is really in the details, and that's where things really go awry.
You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, that will be more than enough. So one of the challenges, and I just want to use an example of fund releases for health and nutrition. So a study by the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, what they found is that money released from the state treasury to the state health society, this money is only at the state level. It's not going below. It has to go below after that. They found that the file to actually approve the money passes through 32 desks. Let me repeat, 32 desks, right? And any of you who've been to a government office, you've seen it. There's so many files, right? So this is adding a lot of paperwork and really leading to a delay in the release of funds. Now, what happens down the chain, right? So this money that's then released has to go to the district level, then goes to the block level. And then what we found is we looked at administrative data at districts and blocks. And we found that when money was released late, right, for supplementary nutrition, now what happens is that Anganwadi workers in this particular state, they receive money in their accounts and they have to buy food for children and cook it, right? Now they received money late, so then children weren't served any food. So you see that while our system is in place, we have clear guidelines and clear policies, and we have a clear idea of what we want to do. What is actually finally derailing coverage and thereby derailing our hope of achieving certain outcomes, for example, well-being and health, it is the financing mechanism. It is the delay in release of funds. And it is understanding these aspects that is particularly crucial. A second example is that of sort of convergence, because this is now quite a hot topic, and the government has, for the first time, a government in India has set out clear guidelines of how different ministries and departments have to come and work together, who all has to be part of these different working group committees. And what we found is that while convergence action plans are actually made, they're very rarely implemented. This is for nutrition and health. They're very rarely implemented because departments are working in silos. They're working on their own things, right? And just one final example, which is that to construct Anganwadi centers, and there are about 1.3 million Anganwadi centers in this country, and still some places need more. To construct them, money has to come from two sources. One is from the Department of Rural Development through MGNREGS for the labor costs to build the center. And the other is through the Women and Child Development Department through ICDS to actually have the material cost to build the center. And if any one department is slightly delayed, your center is not going to get built. Children aren't going to get the services they need. And again, outcomes get derailed. So my major point and my final point is that it is about getting into the details, deep diving into the system, and really understanding from the front line to the top what's going on. And we found that effectively tracking finances, because finances connect all the other activities, and understanding the role of bureaucrats and the constraints that they really face in actually executing and implementing things is particularly crucial. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You didn't take too much time, only about 11 minutes. So may I invite Dr. Kaveri Lichettira? How do I pronounce it? Huh?
I Chetira.
I Chetira.
Dr. Kaveri is fine.
Yeah, Dr. Kaveri. He is from the IIT Delhi and School of Public Policy.
Thank you, Dr. Parekh. So I'll talk about the electricity sector as a system. So I'll dive right into it and not give too much of an introduction about how this is a systems analysis. I'm mainly going to be making a qualitative argument, but there are strong underlying sort of causal relations, feedback loops, groups of factors that come into play, which lead to specific outcomes, which I'll come back to later. So this is about integrating renewables. So developing countries, we all are integrating renewables at a very massive scale. India has the target of 500 gigawatts by 2030. China has 35% electricity from RE by 2030. Latin America has a goal of 70% RE by 2030. And all of these countries face challenges of integrating renewables, and this is partly a result of incompatible institutions. Not so much a technological problem, at least at the moment. As until storage is cheap, we can use and we must use institutional flexibility to make sure that renewable electricity can be shifted across time or space. If we don't do that, as we increase renewable electricity, the share of renewable electricity in the system beyond, depending on the system, 35% to 50%, we'll start seeing that renewable energy will get curtailed at the source. And in India, 90% of all power is traded through long-term contracts. And this forecloses options to balance intermittency across space, which is an important limitation. Most scholars and policymakers recommend introducing markets to enable efficient renewable integration. In 2015, China proposed very strong, substantial market reform. In 2018, in India, the CERC proposed a redesign of the day-ahead electricity market, and currently has a proposal that's still under consideration is the market-based economic dispatch, which I'll talk about a little later. And this is very important for India because as renewable capacity increases, as I mentioned earlier, we will see curtailment if the system is not flexible enough to balance the intermittency. So to illustrate this point, in 2030, one study by Terry shows that during an hour with high renewable energy, more than 40% of Indian electricity demand needs to be met by electricity that crosses an interstate border. Now, given that most of the power is traded within a state, this will increasingly become a problem. Now, while markets are considered very important for renewable integration, most developing countries do not have real-time spot markets, or at least have a very small share of their electricity traded through markets. And this is true across most developing countries. So parts of liberalization that were actually implemented were competition and generation, but long-term power purchase agreements were sort of the mainstay. And this is partly because the context required it to be so. Most developing countries had a lot of shortage, chronic shortage, and we required that generation companies are given the assurance that their power will be paid for. Yeah, especially considering that a lot of consumers do not have the capacity to pay. So what I wanted to do was identify why developing country contexts were different and why the standard model of liberalization was implemented only partially. The reason I wanted to do this was that this could explain explain the constraints or help me identify the constraints under which institutional design should be done for the integration of renewable energy, right? And what the institutional challenges were in India associated with implementing a national market-based economic dispatch scheme. Now, I won't go into too much detail on the contextual differences between developing and developed countries, except to say that the reasons for liberalization were very different across these countries, and the context also was very different. And there's also the objectives and outcomes of reform were also different. For instance, in the developed countries, the objectives of reform were to improve efficiency, and the outcome is that there was a limited increase in improvement of efficiency. In the developing country, however, the objectives of reform were private sector investment, increasing cost recovery for loss-making utilities, and so on. And but the outcomes, we saw that there were no impacts on cost recovery from power sector reform, so it didn't necessarily improve. Private sector ownership did not improve cost recovery. No impact on increasing access or reducing poverty. So how does this all fit into the renewable integration story? Let's do a very quick deep dive into, I've got 3 minutes. Okay, a very quick deep dive into the challenges of implementing a market-based economic dispatch in India. One major challenge is cost recovery, right? So one managing director of a Madhya Pradesh DISCOM called it the mother of all problems, that is working capital. The lack of working capital is a huge barrier, because any sort of dispatch mechanism at the national level will require payment, or at least as is proposed now, requires payment immediately. And most DISCOMs are severely cash-strapped and in debt. And on average, DISCOMs in India take about 2 to 3 years to make payments to the generating companies. Then we also operate in a federal structure where there are winners and losers amongst power plants. So while a Tata Power might, which has, let's say, a lot of merchant assets, will prefer implementation of the market, a state DISCOM may develop power plants and want to run power plants based on other considerations, such as the local economy, and not just cost. So which power plants should be dispatched, it's not a decision that is only cost-based. And do DISCOMs have the capacity to operate with under uncertainty and increasing uncertainty, because they have been operating mainly with PPAs so far. So we need to build capacity of DISCOMs to do that. And who decides the rules of the game? So can you take away powers of dispatch from the state level in a federal structure? These problems are not unique to India. In fact, even in China, pilots for regional markets, electricity markets, have failed. So if we want to integrate renewables, until technological options become viable, like storage, we must, in the developing country context, consider and address distributive justice considerations and socio-political issues. So cost recovery is key for any kind of integrated dispatch or financial mechanisms which are designed to ensure sufficient working capital to enable DISCOMs participate in them. Issues of socio-political issues such as autonomy need to be addressed through dialogue, perhaps, or through other political mechanisms. Distributive pressures in designing retail tariff need to be balanced against demand response needs in a high renewable system. And finally, because both investment needs and risks are higher, adequate institutions to efficiently incentivize investments while managing risks are necessary. So how do we divide risk? Is it the consumer? Is it the power plant? How do we share the burden of uncertainty? So that's my quick presentation. Thank you. Yes.
I probably move India outreach program. Thank you, sir. Thank you, TIFAC and Aisha, for inviting me for the discussion. First of all, I would like to introduce IEEE. It is the world's largest technical professional organization dedicated to advanced technology for the benefit of humanity. The IEEE MOVE, that is Mobile Operation Vehicle Outreach India, is a collaboration between the IEEE MOVE and IEEE India Council, which aims to have disaster relief vehicles with appropriate technology solutions to facilitate the collaboration between the multiple disaster management agencies. It also intends to support STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as well as disaster training and public visibility of IEEE within the area of operation. So now coming to the discussion, every policy is now based on SDGs. So being a teacher, SDG 4, that is education, that is SDG for future stakeholders for any country. It's required. So if we will train our students, our rural students, present children, so we will get a better country, future country. So we know that our 70% population residing in rural areas. So as rural children policies should be made so that on the need basis of their needs, they have to have stakeholders. They have to have recognized the stakeholders. 75 years has been gone for our independence. Thousands of policies have been made. Whether these children, whether the rural area are participating in the policy making. So my idea is to education has some power. Education has some power to prepare your policies, whether it is for disaster management, whether it is a climate change, whether it is renewable energy. The strength is your children, your future. So you all have to strengthen your children, your children's education. Definitely, teachers are one of the infrastructure. So you have to also train those infrastructure for development or your mechanism for any system analysis. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. That was quite quick. May I now invite Dr. Varshne, Sanjeev Varshne, Head of the Department International Cooperation, Department of Science and Technology. Dr. Varshne, he is joining online.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kirit Parikh, the chair, and good evening to everyone. Namaskar. So I would be talking in terms of international scientific cooperation. So chair has already elaborated on system analysis and system dynamics. Now these are something what we are looking for through various tools. So in terms of international cooperation, if I talk about the system analysis, I would say that not only India, but several developing countries of the world, be it in Asia, Africa, or South America, they are facing some key challenges, and there are answers which are possible through technological tools. Let me start with the first challenge, the population. India is going to become #1 country in terms of population only in next year. That's a huge challenge. Imagine the growing population of world and India and China shouldering the major responsibility. With growing populations, what we are losing, that there are two more processes which are happening. One is industrialization and another is urbanization. Together, these two processes, urbanization and industrialization, are eroding agricultural land, agricultural workforce. So what is happening that at one end we are losing agricultural workforce and agricultural land. On the other hand, number of mouths to be fed are increasing. So we need to draw a planning how we are going to feed our increasing populations in time to come. And at the same time, when there are substantial reductions in land and workforce. So we need to come out with technological solutions. How we can go for vertical farming, how we can increase yield, how we can improve yield of our crop, how we are going to reduce the post-harvest losses. In India, post-harvest losses are close to 30%, which is quite criminal. That from farm to house, our dinner table, 30% are lost in the transit. So we need to see how we are going to reduce, and there are technological interventions for that purpose. Similarly, if I could talk about the second challenge, which is water. Now, water is everywhere. In fact, 70% of Earth has got water. But when we are talking about fresh water, only 3% fresh water is there. And within those 3%, nearly 90% water is frozen. So we are getting only 10% water in our rivers, in our atmosphere, and through our lakes and other things. Sometimes, of course, lake water is also saline and is not good to use. So we need to see if we get fresh water. So we have very limited. Now, how to augment our water and how to reduce the pollutions, which several companies, several industrial effluents are adding to it. So this is another challenge. Now, we need to find solutions. I'll give you one example. For example, there is a drain which goes from South Delhi to Yamuna River through Barapula. And what we have done, we have planted some plants which could absorb heavy metal content of the water before the drain water mixes with the river water. So we need to think of those solutions, how we are going to put it. Similarly, agriculture water or even our household water after being used, how we are going to reuse it. That is something we need to constantly worry. The third challenge is affordable healthcare. India is home to 5-star hospitals, and number of medical tourists from developed countries are coming to India for treatment. But unfortunately, we cannot provide same quality of treatment to our own citizens because they cannot afford it. Now, imagine people who are living in hilly area, inaccessible area. They are traveling hundreds of kilometers just to get a test done. Because the pathological facilities or radiological facility are not available in their town. And just to get their doubt clear, they need to travel long distance. And if they have to take treatment, then they have to come to bigger cities. So we need to see how we can reduce that. And fourth challenge, if I could take, is what Dr. Kaveri also discussed or raised about, is energy. Energy has been considered as an indicator of your development. If you are consuming more energy, you are more developed. But question is, how do we generate energy? How do we get energy? So, of course, hydrocarbon sources are going to be limited. She talked about renewable, which of course is the talk of the day. We are talking about cleaner fuels and new fuels. We are discussing about hydrogen, how we could increase the batteries life, how we could do fast charging. We are going for the electric vehicles, which even Ritvik touched upon briefly. So this is energy is going to be energy a major challenge. And of course, now we are generating energy from different sources. So be it solar, be it traditional hydrocarbon or water or hydroelectricity or nuclear energy, we need to integrate them. And tomorrow, what we are hoping that each housetop will be generating their own energy. So we need smart grids to connect, to transfer energy both ways. So not only different kind of energy would be coming, but also we need to see how they would be burdened. Another challenge is environment. Now, environment, those of us who are living in Delhi knows that Delhi used to be very pleasant in winters long time ago, but it is really a curse to be in Delhi during winters. And of course, as per an estimate, each of the Delhiite is smoking more than 20 cigarettes in a day, indirectly. So how do we correct that situation? So these are some of the key challenges, not only faced by India, but several countries in the world. And then come the system dynamics. All of a sudden, you get abruption like COVID, and everything stops, and you need to work out a new dynamics. Now, when I'm talking about COVID, it is very important to listen, understand the dynamics, how market controls the technology. There was few companies, let me say there are 3 companies which developed the COVID vaccine, and they tried to control the global market. Absolutely, it's a market phenomenon, they can do it. But the way they did it, they did not allow companies from other countries, including India, to get recognized. There was a lot of delays in their recognitions. And because countries like India, China, Russia, they started distributing their vaccines to several parts of the world. They were really concerned about their own well-being. But imagine, until the COVID virus is there in any one place of the world, none of us is safe. It will keep revisiting. So it is important that all citizens of the world are vaccinated. But those 3 giants, they were not willing to compromise on the prices. And poor countries could not afford that vaccine. And countries like India, China, Russia, they started exporting it, but then they were not recognized or substantially delayed, or for example, Covaxin on and off the list of WHO. So this is the market dynamics. Second thing, timing of the doses. Of course, first vaccine, anybody was free to take whenever one felt like. But if you see timing of the second vaccine, world over, it was dictated not by medical practitioner, but by the market forces when it was available. And you were given second dose under the threat that you are still vulnerable to the virus, and you are given the dose if adequate stock was available in the market. And several companies, including those in India, they kept shifting the difference between the 2 dose dates. Somebody says you can go after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 9 weeks. That was the situation. And then the same story happened with the booster. In country like Israel, America, people took 5 doses. For what? They are not safe until other fellow is carrying the virus. And it is the responsibility of each one of us that we should provide coverage even to those who can't afford it. So I would like to close at this and with the remark, it is important that we develop technological solutions to the various basic challenges or the various SDGs as has been identified, and we share those technological solutions with all part of the world. And until one part is suffering, if any part of your body is aching, entire body is in pain. You cannot survive that only my hands would have pain and the rest of the body would be fine. So you would get affected. Same will happen with the world, and we need to provide our technological solutions to everybody. South-South cooperation is key of the day, and we need to make good utilization. So I would like to close at this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we have Dr. Ritu Mathur, formerly of TARI, but now with Niti Aayog, and she's a special invitee to this panel. So Dr. Mathur.
Thank you, Dr. Parekh. Let me start, with maybe where we stand today in terms of wanting to go forward in terms of moving to net zero by 2070. And we heard Kaveri talk about the renewables bit. But I think, again, a lot is being said about what all do we need. We need futuristic kind of options like hydrogen, green hydrogen, which are things of the future. We need biofuels. We need several silver bullets and not one solution. So in terms of the hows, in terms of the technologies, maybe there's much more that we seem to know. But how do we get this off the ground? We also know that this is to be done in ways which are much more transformational than what we are doing today. So that's where I think we need to find a path which is different from what we have been doing, what we know so far. And that is where I think the challenge lies in terms of bringing in the transformation of doing things differently such that we can reach the kind of scales which we are not used to. So again, I mean, if you look at renewables as well, what we are putting on ground is something of the order of between 10 to 20 gigawatts per year. What we need to reach that 500 gigawatt target or whatever is about 30 to 40 gigawatt per year. So obviously the way in which we do things needs to change. So the question of needing to see how we use our institutions, what we do to our markets, what we do to making it able to work, need different approaches than just frameworks which can tell us what the technologies need to be. So that's one. Second, I think the implications of what will happen while we do these transformations, whether in any developed countries or developing countries like ours, are those of changes which are again systemic in terms of revenue flows. We get a lot of our revenue in terms of fossil-based flows as of today. And we know that if we are going towards a net zero, this is going to change. So we need to have a way of generating revenues through which we can, again, bring in the transition. We need to think about competitiveness of our industries. At the same time, we need to look at what will happen to potential trade flows. So there's the entire economic aspect of how do we manage the economic transition as we go forward looking at moving towards a net zero. Again, something which Mrityunjay talked about. I think there's a whole thing about supply chains. And you talked about a situation where there were two units which needed to come together to make something work. But I think, again, I mean, let me take the example of, say, automobiles of the future. Again, how does automobile manufacture happen? It's a compilation or coming together of several automobile parts. And companies are therefore looking at, if you had to improve the competitiveness of your automotive industry, how can you minimize the inefficiencies in the whole system of procuring all those parts? So can you get, all the parts at one space rather than, trying to procure them from N number of places? So how do you bring in how do you improve the efficiencies in a systemic manner is what we need to start looking at rather than talk about just a technology solution or, things in a limited domain. It needs to cut across education, changing our ways of reskilling people, thinking of new ways to generate revenues, thinking of new ways to run our markets, run our industrial structures, such that we are able to look at all of the dimensions, whether they are the social dimensions, whether they are the economic dimensions, whether they are the environmental dimensions, in a manner that we can synergize our development path towards a very different new way of doing things. So I think also in terms of some of the transitions which we may see as we move away from fossil fuels, we have a number of policies of the past in terms of trying to look at what to do with coal, for instance. Where do you have a start and a stop to a policy? So again, there will be transitions. There will need to be changes in what you do in the short term, medium term, and long term. But trying to look at also the timing of what you do when is a very important aspect in making sure that you don't lock in your infrastructure or you don't get into potential issues of reaching a time point where you get left with a huge amount of stranded assets. So I think the challenges, of course, are not minor. And therefore, along with new needs of technology, new needs of alternative options, I think we need new ways of thinking as well. And that's where, again, the system dynamics kind of thinking also comes in, to be able to look at what kind of feedbacks can you have and how can they propel action in another way. And how could you therefore shift your systems towards a more sustainable kind of a system. Also, in terms of the last point I wanted to make was thinking about energy security. I mean, we do think about affordability in a developing country. We talk about availability of resources and so on. But do we also need to talk about resilience of our energy system? I think in the potential RE scenario where the REs might ramp up to a very high level, in a scenario where some kind of climate change is imminent, infrastructures are going to be vulnerable. The energy system as a whole is likely to be vulnerable. So again, how do you build resilience, not only in energy systems, but resilience in societies, resilience across infrastructures and so on. So I think there are many, many elements that we need to think about. And it is with this that I would like to bring in the need for thinking holistically and thinking through different approaches at different levels back into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritu, for just concluding it in time. And fortunately, this gives us about 10 minutes for any questions and answers. So anybody would like to ask a question to any of the panelists, please feel free. Nobody? You are squirming, so maybe you have a question. Okay. Anybody else? Well, yeah, please go ahead. Is there a mic available? There is no something.
So my question is to the panel. This is an ideal situation to pose the question. Throughout the conference, throughout the day, systems analysis people are speaking to systems analysis people. But this conference is about enabling integrated policy making. And I'm wondering why we are not hearing or seeing the policy-making community engaging in the conference. And going forward, should we not be having these conferences in which we have much more engagement of public policy people?
So, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, very valid point. Definitely, Actually, some people here are policy people. Ma'am works in Niti Aayog. My organization is called the Center for Policy Research. Now, of course, it's not always the case that everyone is sitting and actually designing the policies. These days, policies get designed in very different ways. There are a lot of stakeholders involved. There's a lot of discussion that happens. I have a feeling that through the day, at least some of those stakeholders have been here today and have spoken as well. And definitely, if you look at the entire list of people, I'm fairly sure that a lot of them have contributed to something. Dr. Parekh, of course, has also been involved in a lot of these discussions. I think as far as all of this, some of the things that we've presented here, so even some of the things that I was mentioning, some of the research that we do, we don't see research as an end in itself. We very much see that it has to be put out in very different ways. And there are different levels at which this is done. One level is, of course, we invite government to talk to us, to partner with us, to discuss things with us, to also share their challenges so that we can also weigh in on them and support them where required. But there are other ways as well. There are a lot of engagements that happen with citizens. In fact, my organization actually conducts capacity building courses even at the grassroots level with panchayat secretaries. So this is literally the village level. So it is across the board that this conversation should be happening. I definitely feel this conversation can be made much more participatory, but I think you can't bring the entire country into a room, right? So I think over here, a lot of people have been called who have actually got the experience of sitting in those rooms and discussing and deliberating over how our policies should look. If anyone else would like to weigh.
Dr. Kaveri, to respond to it.
Thank you. So it's a very important question, and I don't know if I don't have an opinion on whether the existing amount of interaction with policymakers is enough or not. But as an academic, I find that there is a paucity of academics talking to each other in India. And we need to have more of that. We need to have more peer review before we give our suggestions to policymakers. We need to have our ideas challenged within ourselves. And I'm glad that there are conferences like this where, we have a safe space to challenge each other and without having to wonder whether the policymaker will like our idea or not. So that's my perspective as an academic.
Any other question, anybody?
Thank you. For Dr. Kaveri, but perhaps for everyone. You spoke of the challenges India and developing nations will have in the transition to renewable energy. Is there an advantage that India has or developing nations have in this transition to renewable energy?
I think the biggest advantage is that we haven't, at least India hasn't locked in as much as certain other countries have, and we are yet to build out a lot of our infrastructure. So there is that advantage. I think if we do some things right earlier on, we'll have long-term benefits. But maybe Dr. Mathur can speak to this question better than I can.
There is a late starter advantage because you can use more technology. But if technology is IPR controlled and it extracts every last ounce of profit from it, then it doesn't help. But I think what is also important is that if late starter, but consider, for example, if I want to replace 1 kilowatt capacity of a fossil fuel plant, I need 4 kilowatts of capacity of solar because the plant factors are 80 and less than 20. So what happens is that I need upfront investment of 4 times or 5 times as much, depending, assuming that they have the same cost per kilowatt. Actually, there is a difference. So you'll have 5-6 times as much investment is required. So I think we can benefit from the late starter, but if there are others who can really provide us cheap, that is low interest, long-term loans, then it would really, that's what I think is the crux of the climate finance.
I think if I can just add on to what Dr. Parekh said, I think one, of course, is the high upfront cost that is the challenge. But if we also look at, needing to do more and needing to do more faster, it's also EVs that we are looking at, bringing in much more. Electrification being a bullet, which is also lending to efficiency. So trying to ramp up electrification wherever possible, which means that your scale up of RE again becomes higher and higher. So the ability to do that, again, I think rests on what Dr. Parekh is talking about. How do we fund those high upfront costs? And that is where the finance becomes a stumbling block, which again calls for cooperation and making it available. So, redesigning policies is one thing domestically, but I think it's also about international cooperation and making the ability of developing countries who yet have capacities to be built, like Kaveri said, allowing them to go ahead much faster.
Thank you.
And I would say that before the food runs out, you better rush to the dinner. But thanks all. Thanks to the panelists. Oh, you have a question, one more?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, it was about the GDP growths and population growths that was highlighted in this session. So there are some people like Elon Musk who say that the population birth rates are declining and there is a boom coming out, like not boom, like downfall coming out. So that is a very, that's what demand is dependent on. The population and the GDP. And also it was highlighted that the people who want food are getting increased and people who are actually producing food are getting reduced and the land is getting reduced.
Some years ago, I did a study on what would have happened if India had made girls' education compulsory and made sure that all girls go to school for 5 years, at least 5-7 years. And we had data from the National Family Health Survey where we did some regressions to say that really mother's education is the most important determinant of fertility. So, if we had done that in 70 to 75 with maybe $5 billion coming from abroad for implementing this, then we would have it by 2000, perhaps really 100 million less Indians. So you could say that there are possibilities. Now, I have seen a recent projection of India's population, and which says by 2070, it would be only 900 million. So you can see that there are some possibilities, but we have to have a transition which is going to be even tougher. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank everyone. Thanks the panelists. You have a question? Okay.
Yeah, a big round of applause for the panelists. Now we have come to the end of the day, this session with this session. And I thank all the panelists for enriching us with your knowledge and really how bringing in political, economic dynamism and effective systems analysis can enable formulation of better policies across the sector, whether it is food, energy, and education, etc. That's what we heard from you. And as a token of appreciation, just from the organized side, we would like to honor you with a token of appreciation. And I request Dr. Kirit Parekh sir to do the honor and just facilitating our fellow panelists, sir. Yeah, please. First, okay, sir. Dr. Ritu, please. Dr. Kaveri. And Dr. Rana, please accept the token of appreciation. Okay, okay. Oh, there are two mementos. Memento and now I request Mr. Rana. Please, Mr. Ritik, accept the token. Sir, please. Please. So now I request Ms. Sangeeta Bakshi, the overall coordinator of this program, to honor our chairman of the panel, Dr. Kirit Parikh. So thank you so much. Now today's session is concluded and we are looking forward to see you tomorrow. I request all the participants and panelists to join for the dinner, please. Thank you so much.